All right, looks like we are live. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donnie B., and I am your host and moderator for tonight's important debate on our Bible or our modern Bible translations, dangerous and untrustworthy. So it is a privilege to once again have David Preston and CJ Cox here for this again important debate. So these gentlemen have been here before. They've had several debates, and they are very knowledgeable on multiple subjects. So I'm definitely pumped for this one. As everybody knows who's been following the channel this week, it's been a debate marathon. I think it's our third debate marathon this summer, the summer of debates, as we like to call it. So this is debate number 5 this week. We started the week with it's been a nice diversity of debates. We've had debates on all sorts of topics this week. We kicked off the week with creation versus evolution, Matt Powell and David Emery. Of course, that one was a lot of fun. And then we had myself and Luca Medugno. We debated endogenous retroviruses, technical debate, of course. Our endogenous retrovirus is evidence that humans and chimps share a common ancestor. So here on this channel and this debate platform, the moderator himself likes to get in on it once in a while. So, and then we had, of course, the this one was an interesting one for sure. Battle of the T's, T-Rock and T-Jump. Last night we had this one was an epic debate, long one, 3.5 hours, very comprehensive. Charles Jennings and Merritt. 2 Peter 2:20. What is the proper exegesis? And the grand finale this week, debate number 5, not that one, but that one is coming up. So David Preston, we're going to have you back again soon. Right here, our modern English translations, dangerous and untrustworthy. Gentlemen, David and CJ, thanks again for being here. And as we typically like to do here, let's kind of break the ice, get to know you gentlemen a little bit before we get into the showdown. David, let's start with you. How you been, brother? A little bit about yourself, and go ahead.
Well, thank you, Donnie. I'm doing great, and I know you're doing great. So thank you so much for everything what you're doing, as usual. A little about myself. I am out here in Southern California, in the most southwesterly city. And if you're wondering why I'm so tan compared to the other gentlemen, it's because I'm out surfing all the time. So if I'm not studying, if I'm not working hard and being with my family, I'm usually out on the water, usually actually even with my oldest son. But tonight, though, is definitely going to be a special topic to me because this is something that I've been studying for years, and I think it's going to be very eye-opening. So I've done my absolute best to bring the best presentation I can to you in the short amount of time we have. So with that said, I want one thing I want to tell the audience is that one, I read all the comments. I go back to all the videos that I watch or anything I'm involved in. I read all the comments, and obviously I get engaged in those comments. And even on the side comments, I'll look back and I'll read everything what everyone's saying. And so I always take note of that. And I want you to understand that, please, that when I come across in my presentations, understand that this is debate. This is a time to grapple. And I understand depending on one's personality and where they're wired, one can come across a certain way. So with that said, when I'm going to be debating today, could come across as heated, tense, even arrogant to some. I understand that. But please understand, at the end of the day, if you ever come here, you're always welcome to learn how to surf. And with that said, please, I mean that, and I'm looking forward to an awesome debate tonight. You will hear me read very fast in my opening statement. Please forgive me, but I have to. That's just the way I roll. And if you've ever listened to an actual collegiate debate, they put me in a shame. But it will slow down, and then I know CJ and I are going to have a lot of good conversations based upon my opening statement. So thank you so much.
Thank you, David, for that introduction, and I do appreciate that. Yes, once we get into the debate octagon, and I know it takes a lot of guts to, jump into the debate octagon, and so I appreciate every single debater that joins us for these important debates. Although we grapple and duke it out, we shake hands at the end of the day. So, CJ Cox, good to have you as well, brother. How you been? A little bit about yourself, and of course, a little bit about your channel, The Synagogue.
Absolutely, thank you. So, like you said, I run the channel, The Synagogue. It's a Christian apologetics channel where we defend apologetics from a specifically fundamentalist standpoint, not an anti-intellectual standpoint. In fact, excuse me, part of the reason that I do this fundamentalist kind of apologetics is to try and reclaim the word. It doesn't mean extremism. It doesn't mean anti-intellectualism. It just simply means adhering to the fundamentals of the Bible, including but not limited to literalism. So that's kind of the whole deal that we have there. I'm actually, by the way, in case anyone's interested, doing an open mic after show after this debate. So definitely look forward to seeing anybody there who wants to come. For the most part, that's what we tend to do, talking about, biblical literalism, things like young earth creation, early date of the Exodus, a lot of history kind of stuff. Recently, I've been doing, by recently, I mean this year, I've been doing a bunch of stuff on the history of the holidays, both the 7 biblical feasts as well as the so-called universal Christian feasts. And we're also going to be talking about Thanksgiving eventually, obviously, once that becomes topical. But yeah, that's sort of a little overview of my channel. Anybody who hasn't been there, do certainly appreciate you guys showing up, and I definitely appreciate having this conversation. I am a King James Preferred guy, so this is always an interesting conversation to have because I'm not, solely King James, but it is still my preferred Bible.
Awesome. CJ, thank you so much for that introduction. And to the audience, if you like what you're seeing from CJ and also David, the relevant links are in the description box. CJ's YouTube channel, past debates with David Preston. CJ, I understand you're having an after show, so we can definitely post that in the comment section so people know where to go after the debate. And again, we're going to have these gentlemen back here in the next few weeks. So CJ Cox, Turretin fan, they're going to be debating annihilation and eternal conscious torment, and gave you kind of a sneak peek of this earlier, but the James 2 debate. So Charles Jennings and David Preston, lots to look forward to. So if you're not yet subscribed, but you love debates, lectures, interviews, and more, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 11,000 subscribers. So share around to your friends, family, and help us hit that 11,000 subscriber mark. Real quick, I want to go through the format for the audience. So it's going to be formal, and we've done this in the past, and I really like it. So it's very interactive, and it allows for a very comprehensive debate. So we're going to be having 20-minute opening statements. We're going to be starting with David. Then we're going to be having a 10-minute cross-exam where CJ cross-examines David. Then we're going to have a 20-minute opening statement from CJ, followed by David cross-examining CJ for 10 minutes. Then we're going to have 10-minute rebuttals. It'll go David 10, CJ 10. And then a 30-minute open discussion, not quite as strict as the cross-exam, but they will be discussing the topic for tonight, which again is, are modern Bible translations dangerous and untrustworthy? David says yes. CJ says no. Then, of course, we'll have 5-minute closing statements. And then this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. So please make sure you're tagging me with your questions at Standing for Truth. And then that way I won't miss them. So, David, with that being said, we're going to hand you the floor, my good man. And whenever you're ready, you've got 20 minutes. Would you like a 1-minute warning or a couple-minute warning when you hit the
5 and 2? If
2?
you can do it across the screen, that'd be great. I will have my timer on too, though, but I just so the audience knows too.
You got it. You got it. So whenever you're ready, I can get your
Don't get started yet,
PowerPoint up.
Go ahead and put my PowerPoint up, please, and then I'll tell you when to start. Okay, can you do a full screen, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. And when I'm done with full screen, I'll let you know. All right, let's go ahead and start. Audience, I'm looking forward to tonight's debate. It is going to be filled with a lot of new information that you've never heard before. And I've done a lot of research on this over the past 20 years, and you will see this demonstrated during this debate. So with that said, tonight's debate is about the modern versions. Our modern versions translation, our English versions translations, excuse me, are modern English translations dangerous and trustworthy? Dangerous is defined as perilous, hazardous, exposing to loss, unsafe, full of risk. Untrustworthy is not worthy of confidence. The following slides will clearly demonstrate that this is the case. 1, modern English versions are founded on untrustworthy and dangerous manuscripts, Greek texts, and are under the influence of the Vatican and this world system. 2, many of the primary men involved in making the new English versions were influenced by the theory of evolution, collectivism, socialism, communism, modern liberal leftist philosophy, and even the occult. Many of these beliefs influence how their versions were produced. 3. The Vatican's policies has been to reunite the non-Catholic Christians to the Vatican. The Counter-Reformation is alive and well today. The Vatican is doing this primarily through modern textual criticism and modern English versions. 4. With the help of the new English versions, mankind is headed towards the rise and acceptance of the Antichrist and his one world government and religion, the final New World Order. 5. New English versions sow confusion, division, and doubt. And 6. Words have meaning. Satan is all about corrupting God's words for his purpose. Satan wants to dethrone Jesus and bring worship and glory to himself. Major considerations. Number 1, New English versions are in agreement with the New World Translation. 2, the NASB and NKJV label the Holy Spirit as the man of sin. 3, the New English versions promote gender-neutral ideology. And 4, the New English versions rely on dishonest marketing messages. Easier to read, eliminate archaic words, oldest and best manuscripts, latest research, and the use of the word standard. I created this chart because I wanted to show the audience kind of the lineage of the Bible versions to each other and ultimately to where they come from. So if we take a look at the bottom in red, we'll see Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. Westcott and Hort comes from Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. To the right, we see the New King James, and to the far left, we see the New World Translations. Now, let me real quick say that the New King James Version is not new and it's not a King James Version, but I will say this, it at least does an attempt to use the Textus Receptus. Primarily, though, we're going to be focusing on the Greek texts today, specifically those that are related to Westcott and Hort and Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. As you can see here, though, there's a clear relationship between all the modern versions, even the New King James, through the marginal notes, with the Westcott and Hort, Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, through the Nestle-Aland text. It's a very busy presentation right here, so I will probably come back to it if need be, but please, if you need to, pause next time and then take a look at it. All right, so now let's get into the manuscripts. Codex Vaticanus. The word Vaticanus actually does mean something that's very interesting, and that's soothsayers. So actually, the Vatican was named from a city or a dwelling place that was from the soothsayers. I just thought I pointed out there. That's not the emphasis of my debate, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. So each of the next slides, we're going to give some factual things about what I'm going to be talking about in relation to manuscripts and the Bible versions, and then we're going to go into some of the people and their beliefs. So with that said, let's take a look at the date of this manuscript. It's said to be around 4th century. So they're trying to tell us that this manuscript, in which you see right before you, is around 1700 years old. I think there's some doubt in that, especially when you see how good condition it is, how the pages are, how the ink is. But regardless, that's not what I'm going to be necessarily focusing on as the actual date, but that's something I think that should be considered. The discovery location, it was discovered in the Vatican Library, and it was cataloged. When we look at actually when it was cataloged, it was in the 15th century. Before that, there is no official catalog of it until we get to the 15th century. Missing books, 1 and 2 Timothy, Titus is not in there, Philemon, and the book of Revelation is not in there. To note, the Apocrypha is part of the Old Testament. It is included, but specifically, I want you to understand that it's part of the Old Testament. It's not separated like in the Protestant versions. Codex Sinaiticus, or Sinaiticus, however you want to pronounce it. Date, 4th century, never been tested. And by the way, Vaticanus has never been tested either chemically. They are not going to test it any time in the near future. If it is tested, I hope it's done by at least 3 testing sites versus just 1. But just understand that they've never been tested. And look how good a condition it looks like. We're talking about a document that's from, 1,700 years old. I mean, you can turn these pages, you can put your finger on it, and from my understanding, ink's still going to stay there. Now, it was discovered in a trash bin at St. Catherine's Monastery on 1841. There is no catalog of it, so it's unknown. So take note of that. The only time that we really know that it actually existed is when it was discovered at St. Catherine's. Missing books, it's missing Exodus, Ezekiel, Hosea, and I believe it's missing a few other books too. But those are the books I really wanted to highlight. Apocrypha, again, it's part of the Old Testament. It's included in the Old Testament. It's not separate. So when they're talking about the Old Testament, they're also seeing it as books like Baruch, Maccabees, and others are part actually of the Old Testament. Also in the New Testament, they include the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermes. So those can be definitely contentious if one looks at those, especially if one wants to believe that the law of Moses is still in effect today. Anyway, so we'll get to the next one. Westcott and Hort text, as I said, is developed from those 2 manuscripts. They were developed between a period of 1853 and 1881 by a man named Westcott and his friend Hort. They had a huge emphasis. They had huge influence by Aleph and B, the manuscripts I just mentioned. Also by Tischendorf, who actually discovered Sinaiticus at St. Catherine's Monastery, and also Tregales. So these are individuals that definitely had an influence on the Westcott and Hort Greek text, and we'll learn how impactful this Greek text was shortly. Nessa Allen, this is as many already know. You know the New Testament, the Greek New Testament by Nessa Allen. It was developed first in 1898 and it's still being developed, as you know, through many editions. I think we're on edition 28. Next one's coming out in about 2 years. What influenced this eclectic text is Westcott and Hort, Tischendorf, Tregelles, obviously Nessel, and then Jesuit Cardinal Martini. If you look to the far right, you'll see Cardinal Martini all the way over there by the nice blackboard. He's a Jesuit priest, and he had a huge involvement in the development of your Protestant Greek text. Bruce Metzger, who in more of the modern Nessa Allen editions, and then Alan Wickren. This photo could say so much, especially when you see the group within the group here, all the men that gathered together and who they're associated with. So you really get evidence right here. Clearly, that right here is just when the Vatican really started to be openly involved with the so-called Protestants or the Proto-Catholics. Now, let's get to talking about the Bible versions. What we're here to debate. Just going to give you a simple overview, and I hope this helps you. So one of the things I want you to understand is, like I said early on, the marketing method. Understand this, that a lot of times you can learn a lot by the title of a book or what it actually says in the title page. First off, the Revised Version comes across as a revised of the authorized Bible. It is not the authorized Bible. It is a completely new translation, yet they tried to sell it off as like, this is just a revision of it. It definitely wasn't. We know, especially according to Arthur Farstad, one of the leading committee members of the new King James Version, he even admitted on the John Ackenberg debate on the show when he was debating with King James Onlyists that Westcott and Hort actually snuck in their critical text. He said snuck in, okay? So understand this, there was already the devilish play going on when they were making the Revised Version. It was officially published, and when I say it was officially published, I'm talking about when the Old and New Testament finally came together, because the Old Testament was published in 1881. Anyway, so the textual foundation with Westcott and Hort Greek text for the New Testament, published by Oxford. The things I want you to take a look at is the last three. Apocrypha, yes, it was included, separated. Wasn't in the Old Testament. It does have archaic words, and it's gender neutral. American ASV, this was the American version of the RV. Philip Schaff was the leading committee member and who was an ecumenicalist and part of the World Council of Religions. So one of the things you have to take note about the ASV too, it's the Apocrypha is included, not with the Old Testament, but it is between the New and the Old. It does have archaic words, and it is gender neutral. The RSV, one of the most trashiest versions to ever come to Earth, was actually published in 1952 and finally in 1971. The 1971 version is very interesting. I highly recommend that you take a look at the documentary in 1946. All right, so then let's go on to who actually owned the copyright at that time. That was the National Council of Churches. We'll get into them shortly. It included the Apocrypha, as you can see, it's the Catholic edition. Included the Apocrypha in between the Old and New, has archaic words, and definitely was gender neutral. The New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures was published between 1961 and was finally released and complete, and then the latest edition was 2013. Its foundation was the Westcott and Hort, then eventually came the Nessa Allen and UBS, which is a variation of Nessa Allen. The Apocrypha is not included, it definitely has archaic words, and it is gender neutral. Now, before I move forward, one of the things I'm going to prove to the audience is that the New World Translation heavily is definitely one of the big reasons why the new versions can't be trusted. And main reason is because the new versions and the New World Translation are in such agreement. They omit the same verses that you can see, 1 Timothy 3:16, take out God, 1 John 5:7, and they even omit the last ending of Mark 16, and also they take out the adulterous woman in John chapter 7. Oddly enough, the Legacy Standard, so-called, it's anything but a standard Bible, replaces Lord, copies what the New World Translation does, and for years the New World Translation received criticism because of that. New American Standard Bible, It was published, as you can see, in 1971. It does not include the Apocrypha. It does include archaic words, and it is gender neutral. It was started by the Lockman Foundation. The story of the founding is very interesting, and I'll get into just in a second. Frank Loxton was connected with the start of the NASB. He was actually friends with Dewey Lockman. He was actually the pastor of Moody Memorial Church in the 1950s for about 2 years. And he renounced anything he had to do with the NASB because he saw that it was corrupt and it came from corrupt manuscripts. That says a lot from the guy who wrote the preface of the first edition of the NASB. The New International Version, as you can see, the date 1977. Let's skip down to the Apocrypha. It does not include the Apocrypha, but it does include archaic words. It is gender neutral. The New King James Version, go down to the bottom. It does not include the Apocrypha. It does include archaic words, and it is gender neutral. The New Revised Standard Version, here's a Catholic edition of it. It does include the Apocrypha, but it is in between the Old and the New. The National Council of Churches own the copyright of it. It does have archaic words, and it is gender neutral. This one right here, I want to give this to all my Calvinist friends right here. This is the Augustine Bible, the English Standard Version. This is the Catholic edition. So some of you might not be handling this very good right now, but yes, they do have a Catholic edition of it. It does include the Apocrypha between the Old and New Testament. It does have archaic words, and it is gender neutral. Now let's talk about the men briefly. I've just over 7 minutes left. So what I want to do right now is just slow it down a little as much as I can and let you know that the men we're about to review, we're just going to focus on the pictures. And I'm going to try to just be very, very brief on it. And I'm not going to go in deep. That's going to save that for our 30-minute conversation. But the things I'm going to accuse these men of, trust me, I'll be able to defend. Brooke Foss Westcott, it's not Lord Sidious if you're thinking so. But trust me, this man was definitely one of the most darkest men of the 19th century when it came to the Christian faith. He, like I said, according to Arthur Farstad, took his critical text that he developed over a period of time while he was young, and he snuck it into the revision committee. He had beliefs that were in favor of collectivism, in favor of spiritualism, in favor of evolution, and also in favor of Roman Catholic theology. His good friend, Anthony Fenton Fort, accused of the same thing. Now, one of the things I hope we get into is the accusations of their involvement in spiritualism. So what I did in my next slide, I'm going to go into briefly a quote that's very, very important, because everyone says, well, they dabble in it, but then eventually they thought it was silly when they were young. Well, that's actually not the case. And this is going to have a huge impact on the people they're related to and what happens eventually with their text. So proof that Hort joined a seance. This letter was, this is to his wife in October 23rd, 1864. At the age of 36, he said, we had a pleasant evening, 6 of Westcott's 6 form boys dining with us. Then we worked till near dinner. We had a very nice little party. The 2 De Morgans, and we'll get into De Morgans later, H.M. Butler, Farah, Brady, and his mother, and H.W. Watson, Mrs. Brady, came in the evening. We tried to turn tables, but the creatures wouldn't stir. That right there is the documented proof that they were involved in a seance. And they still maintained that seance in the middle while they were building the critical text. Both the Morgans, and they stayed friends with the Morgans all the way to the end, who were heavily involved in spiritualism, were radiant and pleasant. Today we have been to the morning chapel and had a good sermon from Brady. Again, we tried to turn tables, but the creatures wouldn't stir. Shame on you, young men. All right, so let's look at the timeline real quick. If we take a look from 1848, we see their college years. We see in 1851 they start the Ghost of Gill. 53, this is where they call the Texas Receptus vile and villainous. And then we go over to 1855 and we see that the Roby secrecy curse for the Cambridge Apostles is actually written by Hort himself. I can't read the actual oath. It's actually disgusting, but Hort actually is the author of it. If we move over to 64, we see that's when that seance, around the time when the seance was done. So in between, while they're building your critical text out there, these men are dabbling with evil spirits. You can get the reference right here. This is a good link. I'm building this off from that link. It's a very good website, a very good link. I highly recommend you go check it out. Great research. All right, so not much time left, so I'm going to go really fast. Here's Curl-on. He's with the Pope John II, and as I said earlier, you see a lot of, he's a proto-Catholic, and I don't know exactly where his faith was, but this man had a huge, obviously, influence. His name is on your critical edition, And there he is, his wife, I believe, Barbara, next to him. He's having a discussion with Pope John II. And why? Because he was in friendship with them, they were in dialogue with them, and they worked together. Bruce Metzger, one of the top textual critics of the 20th century, his spiritual son is Bart Ehrman. And as we could see here in this quote, we kind of get a feel of like where his theology was. He had a big influence in the NRSV, and also he worked closely with the Nestle-Aland text, especially if you saw in the picture earlier, in his relationship with Cardinal Martini. And he says this isn't a documentary. I'll share at the very end the title, but he says this when they're talking about gender neutral language: we're not given a mandate to change anything about the deity, and we did not change anything about God, our Father, Mother. Just let that sink in. He thinks God's your mother. Catherine de Saintfeld, she had a huge involvement in the NRSV. She was actually one of the 3 women that were on the translation committee. She has a lot to say about sexual orientation nowadays. She actually she was actually, if you want to get a little more insight into her, you can read her speech called Biblical Perspective on Homosexuality. And she gave it at the Gay and Lesbian Concerns meeting at, I think it was Yale. Yeah, I believe it was Yale. But she has a lot to say. And one of the things you have to understand about this gender neutral language is that to them, we have evolved scientifically, we have evolved sexually, and now what their aim is to get us to evolve theologically. And this is one big thing that these new versions are doing. And she says this in response to one of her newest books. She says, we look forward to the day when the adjective woman in the ministry will no longer be necessary as a particular designation, but rather there will be recognition that God calls all of us, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, race, class, country, or denomination. I know she's a brilliant woman, but I don't agree with her approach on changing words in the scriptures to suit her worldview. Now, this is my last slide I'm going to present, and I want this to sink in and understand what this photo means. Now, Luther Weigel was the chairman of the RSV. He was also a leading member of the National Council of Churches, which was established in the early 1900s and has a big part in the New World Order, in globalization, in infecting Christianity, especially Western Christianity, with the satanic philosophies. And here he is. I'm sure he was a sweet man. Like, don't get me wrong, but definitely he taught diabolical things, and he brought them into the new versions. So here he is. He's receiving it's the knighthood of Saint Gregory. And by the way, in order to be given the knighthood of Saint Gregory, you have very few non-Catholics get it. By the way, he wasn't a Catholic; he was a Lutheran. In order to get this award, you have to have been given great service to the Pope, to the Holy See, and I find that very interesting, considering the fact that this is supposed to be a Protestant individual, and here he is in union with, you could say, our arch enemy. Now, if you're Catholic, I'm not attacking the Catholics. What I am definitely attacking is the Vatican system. I absolutely disagree with the Vatican system. I want to read to you the notes in the book that I have entitled "In Discords with the Scriptures," and when it's talking about this, it says Luther A. Weigel receiving the papal knighthood of Saint Gregory the Great under a portrait of Saint Thomas More, symbol of Catholic opposition to Protestant Bible translations. In response to him receiving the award, this is what he said: I rejoice that in this revised Catholic version, we've come to a common Bible in all respects. You can stop staring at the screen. All right, so we'll say one last thing before the buzzer goes. Are modern English versions dangerous and untrustworthy? They absolutely are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David Preston, for that 20-minute opening statement. We are now moving into the 10-minute cross exam, where CJ will lead the way. And gentlemen, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer. Go ahead. Oh, CJ, just make sure to unmute. You're good.
All right. So got a couple of things there I definitely wanted to discuss. I feel like there wasn't enough discussion about the text itself, just some of the people around the text, but we'll get into that. My first question is, and I promise this is related, do you consider Calvinism a dangerous ideology?
Yes.
Do you consider high ecclesiology, meaning governmental structured churches with your priests and all that, do you consider that to be a dangerous ideology?
No.
Okay. So at least one of those things won't end up coming into play. Are you aware that virtually all of the translators of the King James Bible were Calvinists, almost to a man?
Yes.
Okay. So why is that problematic? Or excuse me, that not problematic, but it is problematic if you had a couple of people, not the whole team by any stretch, but a couple of people who, by the way, I am a Calvinist. I don't find this dangerous. I'm just wondering from your perspective, why is it dangerous to have a individual or two individuals who have a wrong ideology there, but the whole team of individuals who have wrong ideology, not a problem in the case of the King James?
No, I'm focused primarily. We're going back. I don't know how the sound. How's the sound? Sound good?
Yeah, it's an echo from CJ's end. So what I'll do is I'll periodically mute CJ when you're answering, so we don't get the feedback. Go ahead, John.
All right. So first, let me just say this: we're not talking about the King James. So I don't know why you're bringing up the King James. I mean, this is not a King James only debate. This is about the new versions. So understand that. Obviously, I don't put Calvinism on the same level as spiritualism, as the occult, and as evolution. I mean, I don't even. They're not even in the same room. It's and as far as the Calvinism goes, Calvinism is just they are unable to rightly divide the word truth completely. So I mean, that's it. But again, why you bring up the King James, the authorized version? Fine, sure, cross-examine.
Well, to be clear, it does say King James only right underneath your name, but yeah, I digress.
But that's not the title, though.
Right, but the point of actually, that'll lead into our next question. Define modern. What do you mean by modern translations? What's the cutoff here?
Yeah, so if you go back to my presentation, my slide presentation where I talk about from the RV, I consider it went from Westcott from the RV to where we are today.
Okay, so then hypothetically, if I had an 1883 Bible before anything from Westcott and Hort was published, would that fall outside of the parameters of modern translations to you? Would that be an okay translation?
No.
Okay, so then let's go back to that previous question. How do you define modern? Because now we were talking before Westcott and Hort, you just told me that was what the problem was. But I just asked you, hypothetically, I have a pre-Westcott and Hort Bible. You said no, that would not be good. It'd still be a modern corruption. So how are we defining modern here? Is it just anything after 1611?
No, I mean, you got versions that are NIV, NASB. You put that in the title of the debate. I think everybody knows when I say modern, I think everybody for the most part knows that I'm not talking about right after 1611. We're talking about the 20th and the 21st century.
Okay, but the Westcott and Hort is the 19th century, so that's the first problem. But the second problem is you're not defining what you mean by modern. You just did say it was after things that were published after Westcott and Hort, things that use Westcott and Hort. But then I asked you if I had an 1883 Bible 2 years before Westcott and Hort, or we'll say 1769, not that that's a relevant thing to our years, cough, cough, Blaney revision. Would you accept that? And you just said no. So when you're using the word modern, what's the cutoff year? Where is this year that we would say, hey, now before it wasn't?
I told you, I demonstrated to the audience, okay, the revised version. Okay, this is when it all started. I know there were Bibles before that, and they all failed, and they were all corrupt. I get it. But we're talking about what I showed on the slide. If you want to talk about about the Baptist version, fine, go ahead. But doing the audience a disservice.
Okay, I think so. Just one more time, because I feel like we're not getting a clear answer on this. If I have a Bible that is before the revised version, before Westcott and Hort is ever published, does that qualify in your mind as a modern perversion?
As I said, I'm focused on the versions after Westcott and Hort. If you want to talk about versions before that, fine. I don't believe. I don't know why are you even bringing those up, but okay. I mean, that's just crazy.
Because we're not getting a good definition of modern here, but we'll go
Why
ahead
don't
and
you
leave that. I
define
think
it?
the audience can see that.
Okay.
So another question I would have here. So you used some pretty weird blanket terms here, like for example, gender ideology, gender neutrality, stuff like that. Now, outside of any text that is meant to be gender neutral, for example, blessed is the man versus blessed is the one. Clearly, it's not saying that the woman is not blessed there. So can you give us an example of somewhere where a modern translation is inserting gender ideology into the text?
Absolutely. But you could stop the time. Okay, can you show my screen real quick, Johnny?
Yeah,
here's a really good example. This is the English Standard Version, as we could see. It's changed. If you look at Matthew 19, it changed man to person, walk as men, and to behaving only in a human way. Soul of man, every human being, man's judgment, and then human court. Also, the big one is John 14:6. No man cometh from the Father but by me. No man cometh from the Father. Even the RV, they all change it to gender neutral. So here's an example.
That doesn't really answer my question though, because
I
in
did.
those
I give you an
instances,
example.
for example, you said no man comes to the Father except by me. Can a woman come to the Father in a way that is not by Jesus?
Of course. But
of course they can.
Yes, of course they can.
Well, hang on. I think you misunderstood my question. Let me ask it again. Can a woman come to the Father in a way other than Jesus?
No. That when it says man, it's referencing everybody.
Okay.
When it says man, it's referencing everybody.
Okay, so that's exactly my point. So in this instance, it's saying no man can come to the Father except by me. That means no person can come to the Father except by me. So that's not inserting gender ideology. It's clarifying the language, and the underlying word is anthropos, which means human being. So do we have an instance where we're actually inserting gender ideology in a place that is not meant to refer to human beings generally?
So one of the areas that is a debate is whether or not what you just said is accurate. And so that's not accurate necessarily what you're saying. If we go back to blessed is the man, we know that it could be translated multiple ways. And we have to understand that verse, Psalm 1, has a lot of prophetic reference. And I believe personally that verse 1 is talking about Jesus Christ.
Okay, but let me get a clarification here. You would agree, though, anthropos refers to human beings, not to males, correct?
It could, but again, what the point I'm trying to get across is that you 100% have translators who are gender neutral fans, and they are literally wanting to make gender neutral statements. So, for example, one of them, and I'll put this up later, is they actually add, for example, father. When we say our Father, they actually add mother. Bruce Metzger, he even, like as I mentioned, and he even goes so far as to say that it's, our Father, our God, our Mother, and our Father, Mother. So that would be an example too. I could pull that up too. But a lot, like Dan A. Speed does this now too. They're adding and sisters. So they're adding things that are not clearly in text, and they do that, and they actually keep it in italics too. So the NASB 20, 100%, they're woke as can be.
Okay, but I think you're still missing the actual point, though. The word anthropos is a Greek word which means humans. It does not mean men, right?
Yes,
and
it
when
does.
we have
Yes,
these
it
translations
does.
here,
yes, it does.
It's referring specifically to humans. For example, you had that verse up there about man's judgment. It's not saying the judgment of males. It is saying the judgment of humans.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So can I? But
exactly.
what I'm saying is the word man. Okay. Today, people don't know the definition of man. You don't know the definition of man, by the way. The word man, it could be like when you say mankind. That's man is literally applying to men and women. Okay. So the word man isn't correct. So what I'm saying is the word man is correct. Why are you changing it? You're changing it because you're aligning yourself with the new thought of gender equality, so-called, And that's what I'm getting at. And there's direct evidence of it. I mean, the translators even admit it themselves.
I don't think there's evidence to it at all. And actually, there's another point I'd like to make here with that. You brought up a Bruce Mesker quote where you said he called God the Father, Mother. My understanding of that quote is that there is a comma in between father and mother, and that the quote is actually, we did not change God, comma, or father, meaning your human father, comma, or mother, meaning your human mother. So
do you know
do you
the
have any evidence
context of what he
referring
says that?
to God as the father, mother? Because I've never heard anything like that.
Yeah. So what? No, it's even still put a comma. It's still the same thing. So here's the thing. What he does in that context, when he's talking about it, they're arguing about, hey, should we have the NRSV? We got to be careful with this language, because one of the translators, in fact, a few translators left the NRSV because they were so upset with what you're promoting, by the way. And they said, no, it should be man, not what you're saying, not a gender neutral. So when he is talking about it, he's talking about the conversation he was having with the translators and with in the context of Catherine, and understanding that God is our father, mother. Okay, I'm going to give the audience too, where they can go get all this and go check it out for themselves. So I'm 100% right on the context.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, I do happen to have the article in front of me, and it is saying that, now granted, I'll grant you, it was published by an interfaith team, no argument there, but the quote does not read that way. The quote reads, God and also father and also mother, which are three separate things.
I'm quoting the documentary. I'm not quoting any article. I can literally.
Okay, well, the article I'm reading from comes from 1990.
Yeah, well, I'm watching the documentary.
Okay, gentlemen, that is.
I think you had just granted me the point, though. You just said you made the quote there, but when you look at it written out, it is referencing three separate things, not one thing. It's God and your human father and your human mother.
I think we're reading the same. I'm not reading anything. I don't know what you're reading. Sorry.
Okay, gentlemen, that is just a little bit over 10 minutes, but time flies by. Great debate so far. That now concludes David's 20-minute opening, CJ's cross exam for 10 minutes, and now we're going to move into CJ's opening. So whenever you're ready, CJ, the floor is yours. 20 minutes.
Thank you. And I will probably not be taking my full 20 minutes, just so you guys know, because it's just not going to take that long to demonstrate some of the things here. So first off, of course, want to thank Mr. Preston as well as Donnie for hosting this debate and participating with me. I also would like to thank the audience for listening here today. I want to ask you guys to listen with a open mind, open ears, because I know the vast majority of people are here. The vast majority of people here are going to be King James onlyists, and so I'm certainly taking the alternative position, the non-status quo position here. Although, again, I am King James preferred. So the question of whether or not the modern translations are untrustworthy is certainly an important one. One of the biggest problems with it, though, is that, number one, we don't have a clear definition of what constitutes a modern translation. So that's the first problem. We just demonstrated that in the cross-examination, where at first it was anything post-Westcott and Hort. Then we asked the question, okay, if I had a non-KJV Bible from 1883, would that be good? And the answer was no. So again, we're left to this just nebulous modern translations aren't trustworthy. And modern is really meant to say anything that's not the King James, which I find to be problematic. The other thing is, very often we're going to find here that the standard is actually going to be the KJV Bible and not actually the underlying Greek or Hebrew from which it is translated. And that's something we're going to find problematic throughout this conversation. I think we've already kind of seen some of it here today. For example, we have these translations of man, and if we use person, that's apparently gender neutral, but the underlying Greek is gender neutral, anthropos. And by the way, when the King James were translating the word man there, it was also gender neutral, as has already been granted by my opponent. Man can refer to mankind. It does not only refer to the male sex. By the way, this also is true for the Hebrew. Adam can be a name. It can be males, or it can be human beings, right? So I want to go through a couple areas where I think that the KJV Bible has gotten it wrong. Now, none of these areas are going to be particularly important. Now, what I mean by that is I don't think the KJV gets anything wrong to such an extent that you should not trust it. However, The question is whether or not these additions that come after the KJV, which improve upon the KJV, whether or not they're actually problematic, and I certainly don't think that they are. So, a couple of different translations we can go through, or a couple of different verses we can go through to demonstrate that some of these other versions indeed improve upon the KJV. One of them is Exodus 20 and 13. Now, if you go to most translations, Exodus 20 and 13 will read, "Thou shalt not murder." Thou shalt not murder, says the Christian Standard Bible. Thou shalt not commit murder, says the Amplified Bible. Thou shalt not murder, says the NASB Bible. Thou shalt not murder, says the King James, or New King James, Bible. JPS Tanakh, which is translated by rabbis, thou shalt not murder. So on and so forth. You see murder, 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 murder. But if you go to your King James version, it's going to say thou shalt not kill. Well, that's incredibly confusing because obviously killing is not always murder. Obviously, sometimes thou shalt kill. For example, when somebody is murdered, the biblical punishment for that is the death penalty. This has caused many debates all throughout history, specifically English-speaking history, where people don't understand that what is being attacked here is the crime of murder and not the act of taking life in and of itself, right? Obviously, that confusion could just be rectified if we simply translated the word as murder, which the modern translations do, but instead we're stuck with the confusion of kill, which is not actually necessary, right? Another example we have in the same book, Exodus 22 and 28. Do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people, says the NIV. You must not dishonor God or curse any of your rulers, says the NLT. You shall not revile God nor curse a ruler of your people, says the ESV. You shall not revile the gods, nor curse the ruler of thy people, says the King James Version. Well, that's super bizarre. Now, the underlying word here is Elohim. The Hebrew word Elohim can be translated rulers, spiritual beings, God, or gods. So it's not as if the King James Bible translators here were completely ignorant of Hebrew. But they did get it wrong. It doesn't say thou shalt not revile the gods. Obviously, the other gods are false gods, and you should revile them. You should revile Zeus. You should revile Thor. You should revile whatever the Hindu gods are. I'm not familiar with their names, right? Saying you shall not revile the gods is a super bizarre, very unbiblical statement. It's a small mistake, but it is a mistake nonetheless. The modern translations improve upon it, right? Another example, Genesis 49 and 6. Let me go ahead and scroll down here. Let me not enter their council, let me not join their assembly, for they have killed men in their anger and have hamstrung oxen as they pleased, says the NIV. May I never join in their meetings, may I never be a party of their plans, for in their anger they murdered men and they crippled oxen just for sport, says the NLT. Berean study, may I never enter their council, may I never join their assembly, for they kill men in their anger and hamstrung oxen on a whim. King James, O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly. Mine honor, be not thou united, for in their anger they slew a man, in their self-will they digged down a wall. Well, hang on, digging down a wall is not the same thing as hamstringing an oxen. In fact, they're two very, very different things. They're not even remotely similar to each other. Hamstringing a horse is more similar to hamstringing an oxen than taking down a wall is. Again, the King James Version simply gets it wrong here. The modern translations absolutely improve upon this, and the underlying Hebrew very clearly demonstrates that. Job 40 and 17. Job 40 and 17. The tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are close knit, says the NIV. ESV, he makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. King James, he moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. Now, stones are obviously, of course, not thighs. The word for stones is not there in the Hebrew. And by the way, this has led to some very bizarre conversations that yours truly has even participated in. For example, Rob Rowe of Sentinel Apologetics has argued that the word for stones here is meant to refer to the behemoth's testicles. Now, obviously, this could be avoided if we just simply translated the word correctly as thighs and not as stones, right? But instead, we're stuck with this mistranslation, which we find in the King James Bible. A couple other versions that are a couple other examples here that I want to go ahead and give. And again, none of these are so important that you should toss out a KJV, but they are worthy of note because they demonstrate there is improvement to be had, okay? The Bible was not written in English. The Bible was written in Hebrew. People who understand English and understand Hebrew had to translate the Bible from Hebrew or Greek in the case of the New Testament into English, and sometimes, because they're fallible men, they do get stuff wrong. They don't get it wrong to such an extent that it completely changes the theology, perfectly granted, but that doesn't mean we can't improve upon it and get a more concise word, like your New King James, for example. Acts 12:4, very interesting one. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. That's what the NIV reads. You're going to see the same thing in your NLT, Passover, ESV, Passover, BSB, Passover, BLB, Passover, KJV, Easter. That's super odd because nobody was celebrating Easter in the first century, at least not that we know of. There's no evidence that anybody was celebrating Easter in the first century. Now, this has caused a lot of bizarre confusion amongst people who like to hate the holidays, the Scroogists, as I like to call them, who say, no, see, Easter is actually in reference to a pagan deity, Ishtar, and this little thing that they were celebrating, yada, yada, so on and so forth. The thing is, it's not actually true, right? Number one, Easter has no etymological relation to Ishtar. Easter is a German word derived from Easteron, and it is originally found in the Venerable Bede from about 700 BC or 700 AD, excuse me. But on top of that, the underlying Greek word is Pascha, which, by the way, is also the reason for the confusion on the part of the King James translators. Pascha in Greek can reference either Easter, as it still does to this day, or Passover, the Hebrew holiday of Pesach, the day that Jesus Christ was actually crucified, hence why they have a similar name. The King James translators apparently mistranslated this, thinking that this was a reference to Easter, when in reality it was actually a reference to Passover. There was no Easter celebration at this time, and this can create some very big confusion, especially in regards to whether or not Easter is a legitimate holiday to be celebrated. And you have people going around saying, oh, Easter is actually related to Ishtar, when in reality, Easter has no etymological relation to Sumerian language whatsoever. And again, this is a confusion that could be very easily avoided if we just allowed for updates in the text, as the New King James and all these other Bibles would say. Last example I'll give today, though we could continue to go on, Acts 19:37. Acts 19:37 reads, you have brought these men here, though they have neither robbed temples nor blasphemed our goddess. That's NIV. ESV, you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess. We can go to the New King James, which says you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of your goddess. Notice, robbers of temples nor blasphemers of your goddess. These two things are related to each other, right? But the King James says, for you have brought hither these men which are neither robbers of churches. The Greek word there would be ecclesia, if it was churches. It's not churches. Nor yet blasphemers of your goddess. Now, question, if this was meant to be churches, as in Christian places of worship, why would it matter that there was any sort of problem with blaspheming the goddess? Well, the reason is because Paul's not talking about churches. Paul is talking about temples. And there's plenty of other problems that we can actually go into with this. For example, you'll very often see things like Rephaims. Notice there's the IMS there. You'll very often see things like cherubims. Notice again the IMS there. But the IM is plural in the Hebrew. There's no need to add an S. This would be kind of like saying the synagogues is, right? CJ's is, or some other double plural like that. There's no need for a double plural. That's a mistranslation on the part of the King James translators. Dropping that S gets you a little bit greater knowledge about the Hebrew language and is indeed more accurate. And you can just go on and on and on with these kinds of things. Now, the very interesting thing, and I'll go ahead and finish with this, the very interesting thing about this conversation is just how inconsistent the KJV Onlyist has to be. For example, they'll say things like, well, there was these people who were involved in seances who had something to do with the Westcott and Hort thing. And in that particular example, he gave the example of Westcott himself, right? Okay. Well, did you know King James was a bisexual? Well, yeah, but that doesn't matter. We're not talking about the King James. Oh, interesting. So when we're talking about the North American Standard, that matters. But when we're talking about the King James, that doesn't matter. It is commonly believed by people that Shakespeare actually had something to do with translating the Psalms. Well, Shakespeare was potentially a bisexual himself and was a very well-known womanizer and drunk. Doesn't matter for the King James, does matter for the New King James. Very bizarre. Well, it's all based off of what manuscripts we get off of. Okay, well, I have a Lamsa translation. The Lamsa translation is a translation that is based off of the Peshitta, has nothing to do with the Textus Vaticanus, whatever it's called. or the Sinaiticus. Doesn't matter there, but apparently matters with all these other translations. In other words, it's incredibly inconsistent all of the time. And with all that kind of stuff, let me just say, I think that this is a very easy thing for us to squash. The reality is the King James is a perfectly legitimate translation, but it does get stuff wrong. Small stuff that's minor, but nonetheless stuff that we can improve on, stuff that we have improved on. It also uses a lot of archaic language that a lot of people these days simply do not understand. It's hard for people sometimes to read, "Thus saith thou art," much ado's and certain things like that. We can solve those problems by simply updating the language, but the KJV Onlyists will not allow us to update the language because that is a modern translation, and all of a sudden it's dangerous. I'll go ahead and end there. I didn't have prepared remarks here today, but I just wanted to point out that there is, in all these different instances, a lot of different examples of inconsistency on the part of the KJV Onlyist, mistranslations on the part of the KJV, and so on and so forth. And I think we'll do very good to get into this conversation as we go.
All right. Thank you so much, CJ. That concludes your opening statement. And we are now moving into the second cross exam round. And we're going to have David lead the way for roughly 10 minutes. So, David, whenever you're ready. And CJ, the floor is yours, gentlemen.
Thank you, CJ. I appreciate that. All right. So let's get into it. First thing, let's see here. I just want to get this as low-hanging fruit. You said King James was a bisexual, actually. What documented proof do you have of that?
Let's see. Right in front of me at the moment, I don't
Without
have
looking
one.
it up on the computer, because we got time is precious. Do you know?
Yeah. So I don't have one with me.
Okay.
That being
All
said,
right. Good.
There
good.
is
All right. Next
letters
question.
from his time.
Okay. No, actually, no. All right. Anyways, by the way, let me just say this. I recommend you read the works of King James. I actually have it right behind me. So definitely there's no evidence in his works, especially Basilicon Dorion. He actually condones it. When Basilicon Dorion, he wrote to his son. I think it was Prince Henry. Anyway, so next question. Now, did he translate the King James Bible, authorized version? Unlike, did he have like the same relationship with the text as Westcott and Hort did?
The exact same relationship? No. A very important relationship? Absolutely. In fact, there was a battle between the Puritans and the Anglicans over precisely this, because, like, for example,
so he had no relationship
with
so he didn't translate anything, and he didn't create the Greek text that the King James is based on, correct?
No, but he did tell them what they could and could not do, right?
So yes,
like,
or
for
no?
example, with
yes
the
or
Puritans,
no?
right?
Wait a minute. Did he have
I've answered your yes or no
translation?
question, but you need to allow for this clarification.
I got the timer short. Did he translate any of the King James? Did he create any of the Greek texts that were based on the King James? Yes or no?
No, but he did tell them what they could and could not say in certain areas. For example, he translated congregation as churches very often. There's a big dispute between the Geneva Bible adherents.
I got it. Thank you. Archaic words. Do the new modern versions, like the New King James, the NASB, the NIV, ESV, do they contain archaic words?
Sometimes. It depends on the version, but certainly some of them do.
Sometimes. What if I was to provide you a list of up to like maybe 100 for each of those? What's the point of bringing up archaic words? Let me ask you this. What's the point of saying the King James Bible has archaic words when the new versions have archaic words? Like, just curious, what's the point? Like, why?
Well, the language can be updated numerous times, so I wouldn't have a problem with that, right? So, like, for example, we don't speak the same way as we did in 1880. So 1880 is going to have some archaic words as well.
Did they speak when they wrote the King James? Sorry. When they wrote the King James, and you can answer, you'll be able to finish, sorry. But when they wrote the King James, did they speak King James too? Because for all I know, all those who are experts in that time period, literaturally and English wise, the King James is actually not modern language during that time, by the way. Did you know that?
Yes, but it depends. So this is actually a little bit of a misunderstanding as what is meant by archaic words, right? So, like, for example, something like ado, much ado about nothing, right? Well, much ado about nothing is something that we'll find in Shakespeare, something that you'll find in numerous writings from the time, like Francis Bacon, right? But not a lot of people use the word ado anymore. In fact, outside of that specific phrase, much ado about nothing, most people never use it at all.
Okay,
and if you ask somebody, what does the word ado mean? They probably couldn't tell you, right? So that's not the same thing as saying something like, thus saith or thou art, which is certainly poetic language even for the time. So it's two different
Okay, so with that said, is it possible that what you accuse the King James of, the other versions are guilty of too?
Some of them, certainly. No doubt.
All right, thank you for admitting that. I appreciate that. Now, let me go back real quick. When you said the King James is my standard, what proof do you have of that when I spoke in my opening statement?
So for you particularly, we haven't gotten there yet. I'm sure we will, but that is the typical KJV thing. So like, for example, Acts 12:4, the word Easter there, would you say that that's incorrect?
Oh, wait, hold up.
Well,
Based upon my opening statement, where does one who's listening hear me say that the KJV is my standard in regards to me trying to prove to the audience that what I demonstrate is going to demonstrate that the new versions are corrupt, are dangerous and untrustworthy? Where in my opening statement did I say anything that would hint that the KJV is my standard in this argument?
I didn't say that you did. What I said is that KJV Only is used the KJV as their standard. And I think we can demonstrate that fairly easily. Like when you say it's corrupted, you mean corrupted based off of what?
Right,
it's not based off the underlying Greek.
You said the KJV is the standard in this debate for me. That's what you said. Okay. All right. Let me see. All right, good. We got some time. Great. All right. What you believe right here that the New World Translation is dangerous and untrustworthy? Can we agree on that?
New World, that's the Jehovah's Witness one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. Why is it dangerous and untrustworthy?
It has very obvious perversions of the text. For example, it says in John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a God. And the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. That is clearly a perversion of the underlying Greek.
Is there any other examples what would make this to be untrustworthy and dangerous, or is that like the only one that you know of?
It's the one that comes off the top of my head, but the fact it's just the point that they mistranslate some of the different Hebrew and Greek texts there to try and make a doctrinal point, right?
Okay.
You could also say the fact that it was produced by Jehovah's Witnesses is a problem. Solely Jehovah's Witnesses, right? No outside source, no Protestant, no Catholic, no Orthodox, nothing like that. That's
I like what you said when you said, because it's biased towards its beliefs is what you're trying to say. I get it. Is it possible that new versions are guilty of the same thing too?
I think some of them are. This is a
which version though? Can you tell me which version would be?
I do not like the NIV. I think the NIV is very liberal, and I do not like it.
So you would say the NIV then was potentially dangerous and untrustworthy, then, right?
Certainly, no doubt.
Okay, so that is to the audience. Take note of that. So we do have you admitting on that one. Thank you. In my understanding of the behavior of individuals when they're part of the translation committee, is it possible that by having someone who is of a different worldview, completely different worldview, and I'm not saying they're not saved, I'm just saying like they're all about pushing an agenda of collectivism, of even part of the occult. Are you concerned if people like that are part of these new Bible versions? Does that bring any concern to you?
Yeah, it certainly can. It'll always vary because there's so many different modern translations. You have to go piece by piece. And there's also the unfortunate problem of you can't have people who agree on everything translating, because then they have their own biases seeping in, right? So it's a little bit of a balancing act here. On one end, you don't want people who are flagrant communists and stuff like that translating your Bibles. On the other end, you can't have nothing but, for example, I'm a Calvinist. You can't have nothing but Calvinists, because then it's obvious you're going to have a Calvinist bent in that Bible, right? So it's a little bit of a balancing act, but certainly it's something we should take note of. I have no problem with anyone taking note of Westcott and Hort's, positions on seances and stuff like that. We should always be aware of these kinds of things.
And you don't think, is it possible that their worldview and their philosophy and those that they were closest with bled into these new versions, thereby making them dangerous and untrustworthy? And even in the way they build their texts? Like, for example,
it's possible, but it would need to be demonstrated.
Okay.
Like, for example,
it's possible to be demonstrated?
By showing us an example of a text where that sort of ideological influence is being demonstrated, right? So, like, for example, when I go to the John 1:1, I'll be very quick. When I go to John 1:1 and I'm talking about the New World Translation, right? I can show how not only how that differs from the Greek, but how that's influenced by Jehovah's Witness theology, right?
Okay,
so it has
but
to be something kind of like
what
that.
if the Jehovah's Witness in their newest edition put it in the margin? Is that okay? Because they put divine, so they actually agree with you now because they put in the margin. Is that okay? Does that make it now a version that potentially now is trustworthy and no longer dangerous? Because that was your one example you used.
I guess that's an interesting question. I would, because what I immediately think of when I think of that is, like, for example, Schofield, right, or other commentaries. If you're putting something in the margin that's not actually a part of the text, the commentary can be dangerous, but it's not dangerous in the same way as mistranslating something.
All right, got it. Let's see here. All right, I got one more. I don't know what time we're about to get on time, so give me a second. All right, so in an email I sent to you, I said, hello, this is dated June 17th. Hello, CJ, I hope all is well. Thank you for the last faith and works debate. Would I said, I left out you, would you like to debate on whether or not the modern translations are dangerous and untrustworthy? I would take the affirmative. We could limit to the ESV, NIV, NASB, and NKJV. And you replied back on the 25th. Yeah, I'll be willing to discuss with you. Apologies for late response. Excuse me. So clearly, in my email to you, I told you what our focus is. You spent literally 20 minutes on a topic that we're not even supposed to be debating tonight. So can you just respond to that, please?
I'm not sure how I was doing anything that was outside of what we had talked about, but as far as even some of those individuals, I don't have any particular beef with the ESV. I actually enjoy the NASB.
Yeah, no, the point of the email was, CJ, is that our focus tonight are the modern versions. And I specifically outlined those modern versions. And you spent 20 minutes talking about correcting, quote unquote, air quotes, the King James Bible. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen. That's 10 minutes, between 10 and 11 minutes. So equally timed cross-examination rounds. So very engaging debate so far. I'm really enjoying this, and so is the audience for sure. So reminder to the audience, though, if you do have questions for the debaters, as we will be having an audience Q&A, please do make sure you're tagging me. Okay, we've got the opening statements and the cross-exams out of the way. Now we are moving to the rebuttal. 10-minute rebuttal, and then we're going to have a discussion after that. So David Preston, whenever you're ready, you have a 10-minute rebuttal, and you just let me know when to start your timer.
All right, thank you. Well, as you just heard in my last comment, definitely CJ is not prepared, and he was not aware of what this debate was really all about, which is fine. We're still going to move forward. He did make the comment that he didn't even prepare his remarks. So definitely, you want to prepare before you come and debate me for sure. But seeing that most of what he had to say was really against the authorized version, the greatest book ever to come on earth, it just blows my mind. But again, I'm not going to focus on that. So let's focus on what this debate is all about. So in my cross-examination with him, we got to learn a lot. And that's potentially the New World Translation could potentially be a Bible that is trustworthy, no longer dangerous. Now, many out there might be getting triggered and might be foaming at the mouth. Some people be rolling in their graves, realizing that's anything but the truth. This will never be trustworthy. And this will always be dangerous and untrustworthy, no matter what. There's nothing you can do. It's already done. And so when my opponent specifically says, hey, it's in the margin, and I'm telling him, excuse me, it doesn't do him justice, and definitely, in my opinion, clearly shows that I've won the debate. He thinks the NIV is untrustworthy and dangerous. I find that. I'm glad he admitted it, but man, in the email, I specifically even said the NIV. And so I'm taking the affirmative. So, again, you're not prepared, CJ. So what I'll do is I have 8 minutes left. So I'm going to take my 8 minutes to kind of go back over kind of some of the things I taught, and then add to that actually. And so hopefully I'll help the audience out realize that those who are clinging to these new versions, you need to get out of there. You need to wake up. You need to get out of the matrix. All right. Can you share my slides, please?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Let's go back to this. This is a very, very big one when it comes to the seances. Look, do you want someone, okay, like Hort messing with your Greek text, who is having seances, who was very good friends with the Morgans? This isn't like I was part of this group and I kind of like realized it was all silly. If I know who your friends are, I'm going to know a lot about you. So if you take a look at Hort's friends, you're going to find out a lot of interesting things about him. So I'm going to skip a few slides. Give me a second. By the way, CJ, I really want to hear more about this, about Luther Weigel and his involvement with the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican specifically. I'm going to get into my appendixes. So the National Council of Churches, if you don't know, is definitely, has always been from the beginning part of the collectivist movement, part of the movement to bring about the New World Order. One of its founding members, or not founding member, one of its early members was John Foster Dulles. And if you don't know who he is, he was the brother of Allen Dulles, the founder of the CIA. John Foster Dulles' son actually even became the first cardinal from the United States, and he was part of the Jesuit order, which, by the way, has had many problems throughout history and is one of the leading orders in the Counter-Reformation movement. So one of the things I want you to understand is that the National Council of Churches owned the copyright of the RSV, and then the ESV, and eventually took over it. And then they made the ESV in Crossway. Also, on top of that, the NRSV, as we know, many people would find it to be very liberal, untrustworthy, and dangerous. Oddly enough, Dan Wallace, the conservative textual critic, thinks it's a good translation for ecumenical purposes. But if you take time and study the National Council of Churches, you're going to learn a lot. And I'm going to read something to you. This is from the book Collectivism in the Churches. Keep the slide up, please. Don't let it go. One of the things I want you to understand is that from early years, many of the early members, and Luther Weigel was one of the early members. He was a major leader in the National Council of Churches. And as you can see today, much of their worldview doesn't fit with conservative traditional Christian values. All right, so it says this. I'm on page 165. This is talking about Chairman John Foster Dulles. He submitted a report. This is about World War II. He says in the report, and you can find this. There was an actual congressional discussion about the involvement of RSV and the communist ties. But anyways, let me go back to John Foster Dulles. He says, John Foster Dulles, this is page 165 of Collectivism in the Churches. And this was written in the 50s, by the way. Chairman John Foster Dulles submitted the report, which has been approved by the members of his committee. It was the most shocking report that has ever come out of any church group, intended to be Protestantism's super program for a just and durable peace after World War II. It included the following recommendations. Listen to this, people. 1, ultimately a world government of delegated powers. 2, a complete abandonment of United States isolationism. So what they're asking for is perpetual war, in my opinion. Anyways, 3, strong immediate limitations on national sovereignty. 4, international control of all armies and navies. 5, a universal system of money. 6, worldwide freedom of immigration. 7, progressive elimination of all tariff and quota restrictions on world trade. 8, a democratically controlled international bank. He wrote this before it was all said and done. John Foster Dulles had a very strong connection with which was, I think, believed in the Federal Council of Churches, which then eventually became the National Council of Churches. So I find this interesting because John Foster Dulles was actually good friends with one of Hort's in Westcott, friend Alfred Balfour at the Balfour Declaration. We'll go on the next slide. I have a few minutes. Great. All right. So this is, as I mentioned in my opening statement, that I definitely accuse the New King James and the NASB of promoting Satanism, essentially. And by the way, I highly recommend you watch Donnie's videos on Standing for Truth, End Times Theology, Episode 1. He does a fabulous job demonstrating that the restrainer is not the Holy Spirit. And I've been teaching this for over 20 years. I've been debating some of my Catholic brethren because we all heard those sermons, you know, like the Holy Spirit's going to be taken out of the way, yada, yada, yada. But Donnie does a great job. And Tony, I take my hat off. You did a wonderful job. But take a look at his video. But what we have here in the New King James and the NASB, specifically saying this, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, only they capitalize it, meaning that they think that that's actually the Holy Spirit. They're deifying it in the way that they're connecting with God Almighty, and that is nothing but blasphemy. It is satanic. And right there, you see before your eyes the NKJV and the NASB. There's your evidence, CJ. Clearly, right there, you have right there 2 modern English versions labeling the Holy Spirit as the man of sin. That's sad. Let me go on my next slide. As I mentioned, the gender neutral versions, this is really big because you have to understand that the ideology we've seen in 2020 and 2021, and now we're moving on, we've seen the attack on the traditional family. It is absolutely sad. I mean, we don't even, definitions are gone. We have Supreme Court members that can't answer simple questions, okay? We don't even know anymore like who we are, I feel like. And this is in many ways rooted in the ideology of the early globalists and how their agenda is being spewed out onto us through the television, but worst of all, through our own Bibles. And it's really sad because the new versions, as you can see right here, they are clearly being influenced by the world, and they're not influencing the world. You have to understand something, that if you're going to have something influence the world, you're going to change the language, like Shakespeare, like the authorized version. But no, not the new versions. They put their ear to the wall and say, how do you want us to talk? Okay, we're going to do what you say. Oh, and on top of that, guess what? If you don't want us to offend you, we're not going to offend you. We're going to adjust to your way. Honestly, people, is that what the apostles died for? Is that what the early martyrs, went to the flames for? No, please, you need to wake up. We are literally being hijacked by the New World Order and the satanic globalists. You could call me what you want, tin wearing person, whatever. I can absolutely demonstrate, as I already, the agenda is alive and well, and they're doing it. They literally want to do it. So I'm ranting on this. I apologize, but it's one that I find very, very inconvenient for those who are trying to say that the new versions are, let's say, not dangerous and that they are trustworthy. And also, here's the word I mentioned, divine. I knew you were going to say that, so I wanted to just add to the audience that, listen, if it's in the footnote, I guess that means it's okay. You can stop sharing.
All right, David Preston, thank you so much for that 10-minute opening statement or 10-minute rebuttal. And CJ, we're going to hand it over to you for your 10-minute rebuttal. And on your first word, I'll start the timer. CJ, just make sure to unmute. You're good. You're good.
All right, thank you. So, friends, there's a couple of things I think have been made manifest so far in this conversation, and I want to go over them very briefly for the audience's sake. So, the first thing that I think has been made manifest here is some of these claims are just simply untenable. For example, the claim that the gender-neutral language being used was somehow an insertion of gender ideology. Well, we saw in each individual example given that the point was not actually to be male-specific in the scriptures, and that was even conceded, right? The scripture does not mean to say any male can only come to the Father through the Son. It means to say any person may not ever come to the Father except by the Son, right? In other words, the verse itself is gender neutral, and the underlying Greek and Hebrew in these instances is as well. For example, Adam, which means humans, or anthropos, which means humans. Now, we don't see anything like, for example, Leviticus 18:22, which uses the word zakar to refer to males when it's talking about homosexuality. We don't ever see that being changed to something gender neutral, right? There's a reason for that. It's because the underlying language doesn't allow for it, and it's not the context of the verse. But in all the examples we see here, we were able to demonstrate, I think, quite plainly that these are meant to be gender neutral originally, and that the original King James and everything else like that is just going to be translating it gender neutrally as well, using the language that they typically used at the time. Some of the things that we saw as far as like archaic words and stuff like that, we just didn't have much of a demonstration. But I think if I understand the point correctly, that was to say that sometimes modern translations use archaic words too, which does happen. So I don't have a problem with that. There was the comment made that because I think the NIV is problematic, that means I'm not prepared. But here's the thing. You said modern translations with the plural. You hear that? That means all of them, right? That means you're trying to say any of these things which I define as modern, which, by the way, was not ever properly defined for us, but nonetheless, all of these translations which I define as modern are bad. That's not just the NIV. That's just not just the New World Translation. That's not just the Message. That's the Lambda, the New King James, the North American Standard, the English Standard, the Revised Standard, the JPS Tanakh 1917, so on, so forth, keep going down the line. There's, I think, 151 English translations of the Bible, and only 5 of them that I am aware of predate the 1611 King James Version. That would mean that you're making the claim that 145 different English translations of the Bible are perverted. You can't just say, well, you thought the NIV was perverted, therefore I have a problem here. No, not at all. Not at all. We saw, I think, some examples of just misrepresentation of quotes here, which I found very problematic. For example, you had the Metzger quote, I think it was. Yeah, Metzger. Bruce Metzger being quoted as saying God was the father, mother. But that's not actually what he was saying. He was saying we had no mandate to change God or father or mother, 3 separate categories. He's not talking about God as the father, mother. He's talking about God, your human father, and your human mother. And that kind of misrepresentation is something that we continue to see here in the rebuttal too. And I say that with respect. But for example, we saw apparently the Holy Spirit was called the man of sin, and God forgive me for even uttering those words. But nonetheless, that's what the claim was, and the New King James Version was one of the ones in front of you. Well, I'm going to read both the King James and the New King James, and you can tell me where there's any difference at all, because I'm certainly not seeing it. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, says the KJV. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, says the NKJV. Okay, so far identical. Back to the KJV. Only he who now letteth will let. Only let me restart that. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. Next, only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. Interesting. I can't seem to find any difference. Can you? No, because they're actually talking about the exact same thing. Now, the word let here is a little bit archaic for our purposes. We don't use the word let in the same way that the old English speakers used to say. But back then they would use the word let to say restrained from, right? So for example, Paul says, I wanted to go to such and such a place, but I was let, right? Meaning I was not allowed to. It's just an example of the language kind of shifting over time, no harm, no foul. But the point is that both of these versions are actually saying the exact same thing. So if the NKJV is apparently being blasphemous, then surely the KJV is also being blasphemous. If the NASB, which says the same thing as the NKJV, is being blasphemous, then certainly the KJV is being blasphemous. And by the way, in case you think you're going to get out of this with the Geneva Bible or the Wycliffe Bible or anything like that, nope, sorry, they're all going to say the exact same thing. We didn't see any answers to all of the different examples of error, small error, but error that we find in the KJV, just saying, I'm going to dismiss that. It's not relevant to the debate. We're talking about modern translations. But friends, here's the thing. If improvement can be made on the older translations, then it follows modern translations are not inherently corrupt. In fact, it even follows that there's necessity to have modern translations if indeed we want a completely perfect Bible, right? Now, again, I don't think the KJV is going to get anything wrong to such an extent that it's a bad Bible, and it is my preferred Bible for a couple of different reasons. I noticed there was a question about that in the live chat, so I'm going to save my answer as to why for the Q&A session. But with that being said, there is still problems. There is double plurals with words like Rephaims and cherubims. Those aren't things, right? There is problems with translating Easter when it's supposed to be Passover, or translating it church robbers when it's supposed to be temple robbers, or translating it murder when it's, kill when it's supposed to be murder, and so on and so forth, right? We didn't see any examples here given, where any of these modern translations are actually changing the underlying meaning of the word, which, by the way, I could have personally done, right? I already brought up the fact that I don't like the NIV. Well, one of the reasons why I don't like the NIV, is because it says, for example, in Genesis 1, there was evening and morning one day. Well, evening and morning one day is not the same thing as evening and morning the first day, right? Clearly, those are two very different things. One is saying this is the first chronologically. The other is saying this is just a day, right? And the same thing continues on as far as the rest of those when he says, the second day and all that other kind of stuff. You've already set the standard there as this is just a sort of nebulous period of time. And of course, you can go to people's arguments. They say that kind of stuff all the time. I don't think we saw any proper examples given of any Bible that we would consider to be trustworthy that came after the King James was published actually being demonstrated to be inserting communism, Darwinism, some other sort of weird ideology. And in fact, a lot of the stuff is just straight up anachronistic, right? Did Westcott and Court have their problems? Sure they did. But the sexual revolution didn't happen until like 1972. So they're definitely not inserting gender neutral ideology into the text. That's just not a thing back then, right? Or when we were talking about some of these modern versions, putting communism or Darwinism into it. Well, both of those came out in the 1800s. It's possible the post Westcott and Hort could have that happen. But what about those Bibles that are in between 1611 and 1885? Those communist manifestos and On the Origin of Species and stuff like that did have a published date. It's not that far ahead of what we see in Westcott and Hort. And by the way, did you know that a lot of these older Bibles have been misinterpreted by cults before and are their main versions? For example, when Joseph Smith was coming about, Joseph Smith has actually plagiarized many of the KJV words that were incorrect into his Book of Mormon. It's actually one of the ways you can demonstrate that Mormonism is false, right? But what does that mean? It means his influence was the KJV. Does that mean the KJV is a flawed Bible? No, of course it doesn't, right? It just means that people can misuse these texts for anything that they would like to. So unless we have a clear demonstration that there was an insertion of ideology in the text and that was manifest by changing the vocabulary somehow, all we have is a bunch of empty claims, friends. There's no reason you shouldn't trust your Lambda. There's no reason that you shouldn't trust your NASB. There's no reason that you shouldn't trust your New King James Version. And by the way, there's no reason that you shouldn't trust. Thank you. There's no reason that you shouldn't trust a couple of other Bibles out there as well. It doesn't mean they're all going to be perfect. Your Message is a terrible paraphrase. The New World Translation is clearly occultic. The Joseph Smith version, clearly occultic. Doesn't mean every single Bible that came after 1611 is fine, right? What it means is not every single one that didn't come after 1611 is fine, okay? And this becomes an incredibly big deal when we're talking about where people want to say, well, where is God's word? God's word is sitting there, certainly in the manuscript tradition, but also in the translations we've had passed down over time. The King James was an improvement on the Geneva, and likewise, the New King James was a improvement on the King James. That's just something that tends to happen with these. We have improvements over time as we translate these, as we get a better understanding, that sort of thing. It doesn't mean that the Bible was ever lost. The Geneva Bible will still be perfect to get you the gospel, to get you the law, to get you the history, all that kind of stuff. It just means that these modern translations are not something we can divide over and tell others, you're occultic, you don't have a right Bible.
All right, gentlemen, fast-paced debate. Great job so far. We have now completed the opening statements, the cross-exam rounds, and the rebuttals. So time is flying by. We are now into the 30-minute open discussion, and this will be a little more free-flowing than obviously the strict cross-exam. What I'd like to do is, because CJ just ended with his 10-minute rebuttal, let's allow David to pick the first topic or question or point, however you'd like to proceed in this discussion portion. Gentlemen, 30 minutes on the clock. The floor is yours.
Well, first off, let me just say this. This is not about the King James Bible. So I'm not, if you ask me a question about the King James Bible, I'm not going to answer it. Depending on how I feel, I'm not going to get into it. This is about the new modern version.
Okay, hang on though. We got to stop there already though, because that's a very dishonest debating tactic.
It's not.
If I may be frank.
My email was very clear. My email was very clear.
Hang on. Are they trustworthy according to what standard?
Listen, if you want to bring him to King James, fine, because I want to keep this debate going, and out of respect of Donnie, what he's done for us, I mean, my goodness, we should be paying him for what he's doing for us. So let me just say this to the audience. I read you the email. It was super clear. And on top of that, if you want to ask me a question on the King James Bible, I may or may not answer it. The focus is about, are these new versions corrupt and dangerous? So
when you have a verse from the NKJV that is wrong, let's just assume it's wrong. How do you demonstrate it's wrong? What's the standard that you can show to demonstrate it's wrong?
All right. So can you share my slide, please? Share my slide. Thank you so much. All right.
Yep.
You specifically said, and CJ.
Answer my question.
I'm going to answer it. Hold up. By the way, I'm the one that gets the answer first. I can start off. So here's the thing. You said unless ideology can clearly be demonstrated that it's inserted in the text, then I'm not. Then obviously I'm wrong. I can definitely demonstrate it, and I demonstrated already. Also, you said the new world translation was occultic. So I mean that's something that hopefully we can talk about. Now, in regards to your question, ask it one more time, please.
When you say X verse is wrong, what is the standard? What are you putting it next to say this is what it's supposed to say? This is what it says. Yeah. So right here, the verse I'm using, all right, is 2 Thessalonians 2:7. It says, for the mystery of law, you weren't listening to me, by the way. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he, look, I told you it's capitalized. That right there is saying that he is the Holy Spirit. That's why they even put in the footnote the lowercase he. The NASB actually changed it. All the early NASBs, they had lowercase h. But what the translators are communicating to the readers is that H, that capital H, is deified, is one of the members of the Trinity. That is what they are teaching clearly right there. And then I referenced the audience to Donnie's video that clearly shows that the man of sin is he, not the Holy Spirit. Okay, but you're still completely missing the point here, right? Because first off, you just admitted that some of the earlier NASBs actually don't have a capitalized T, so logically this would only count for much later versions, not its original. But even besides that, though, this is still, these texts that are right in front of you are clearly making a distinction between the man of sin and the person who restrains, right?
Who's the person that restrains?
The Holy Spirit.
No, he's not, man. Oh.
I have a completely different understanding of eschatology than you do.
You believe the man of sin is the restrainer. My goodness.
No.
All right.
I literally just said the exact opposite. You're being dishonest. I mean, I'm going to call you out on it. You're being dishonest.
Watch Donnie's video.
I just made very plain that this text is meaning to make a distinction, and I also make this distinction. Okay? Now, you have a different eschatological understanding than me. That's fine. That's not the point of this debate. However, you're not going to get away with these little jabs saying, oh, you see that, friends? You see what they're doing? No. You have a different eschatology, which is why you read the verse different.
No.
The people who translate it have the same eschatology I do.
The context, eschatology has, no. The context is what is the standard by which you define who he is. You can get any other new version, whatever you want. Anyone can read through the context that is not the Holy Spirit. You think that's the Holy Spirit, that's the man of sin. You're guilt. That's not good. That's not good. Again, but that's my point.
It has everything to do with eschatological understandings. This is why no pre-mill takes your position.
Let's just say though it is.
So now, but hang on, no, because you actually have avoided my question. What is the standard? Show me
the context
here. So the context is standard. So the context of what exactly?
The context of the New King James Version and the NASB.
So the context of the New King James Version is the standard by which we can tell whether or not the New King James Version is accurately translated. How does that make any sense?
I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense to you, but when you read the chapter...
No, it doesn't make sense, like, period.
No, when you read the chapter, contextually speaking, okay, the he is not the Holy Spirit, it is the man of sin.
Okay, that's an eschatological question again. There is a reason every single pre-mill who has ever existed, bar zero, understands this the way I do.
That's the Holy Spirit, and that's blasphemy.
Okay, again, you're using dishonest debating tactics. It's not going to fly here. You're talking about eschatological differences. Find me one pre-mill who disagrees with me, and I'll consider your point.
Here.
But until
right
that,
here.
get
right
back
here.
to my question.
Johnny, I disagree with you. Ruckman disagrees with you. You know, I mean,
are you pre-mill?
Yes. All right.
So you believe that the rapture, just to clarify, you believe that the rapture is before, and then you have the millennium after, all that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Fair enough. There's at least one there.
Okay.
There's at least one there.
I think Donnie is. So anyways, because
you still avoided my question though. If I have because you're not answering the question. If I have, for example, Acts 12:4, where it translates in the King James Easter and it'll translate in a New King James Passover. Okay, one of those is wrong. One of those, and you can't use the context of the verses there because the question is, what is the context? Hence the different words, right? So what are you going to compare those to demonstrate to me the New King James is wrong?
Okay, again, I told you early on, this debate is not about the King James
You're
Bible.
not answering the question. I'm not letting you get away with this. We're not moving on until you answer this question. What is the standard to demonstrate the New King James version is wrong?
The King James Bible authorized version is the standard, okay? But in my debate
all right, there
tonight,
you go.
No, wait,
there
wait,
you go, friends.
Debate, no, in my debate, this is not what I'm using to tell you that you're wrong right here. Okay, Donnie doesn't need his authorized version to tell you what I just told you on 2 Thessalonians 2:7. Let's move on to the next question.
I gave you an example of a verse, and I've used plenty of others. I gave you an example of a verse, Acts 12:4.
I'll give you an example. 1 Corinthians 6:9, okay? The RSV, okay, use the word. It's the first time in an English translation the word homosexual is ever put in it, okay? And the RSV obviously created a lot of stir. Mr. Weigel received a letter from a man by the name of David, didn't give his last name, and I've listened to his talk and everything. This letter's actually for public record now. You can actually go check it out for yourself. But he wrote him, and he had very critical response to putting the word homosexual. So John Weigel definitely took it as consideration, but one of the things they couldn't do is since they just got through one of their first edition, they had to wait. They agreed to wait another 10 years before they can make any changes to 1 Corinthians 6:9. In 1971, when the new edition came out, they replaced homosexual with the word sexual pervert. And they did that in large part because of the I think it was a young seminary student, Mr. David, and he wrote this very, very, very in-depth letter to him and telling him you shouldn't use that word. Instead, use something else. So that is clear evidence that an ideology from outside was inserted inside a new modern version.
Okay, I just want to clarify on something, though, because you actually already defeated yourself on that point. The original RSV did include the word homosexual, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's it. That's the entire rebuttal.
Okay. So for those who are using it in 1971, when they changed it, are you telling me that there's no proof that ideology was inserted into the text?
No, what I'm telling you is that the original RSV, which is under your classification of modern versions, got it right, therefore demonstrating the blanket topic here, our modern translations untrustworthy just as a rule, is not correct. And by the way, I want to point something out here because you and I appreciate you answering my question that you said the KJV is the standard you compare it to. That means you literally cannot see my evidence, right? Because if I give you any example where the New King James improves upon that which came before it, which it does. There's no denying that. If I give you any example of that, you immediately are going to fall back on, well, that's not what the King James says. But it doesn't matter what the King James says if the King James is in question as to getting it wrong, or if the modern versions are in questions as to getting it right. We need an underlying standard by which we can judge all of the Bibles.
Now, here's what I'm doing.
And I give plenty of textual examples where modern Bibles improve upon older ones.
All I'm doing is I'm demonstrating that the ideology of the globalists, the collectivists, the occultists, the evolutionists is being injected into the new versions. I don't need, to be quite honest, I could be a full-blown atheist right now and have this debate. I don't even need to be a King James person or an authorized version. I don't need to be. And that's what I'm trying to get the audience to understand. I'm taking it from that approach. You do not need it. You don't have to be a KJV only, whatever you want to call us, to believe that these new versions they're being influenced by the outside ideology. I can't believe you even think that. Anyways, let's do
Yeah,
this.
it's just a fact because so for example, there's a
I
couple
really
ones I
doubt
gave
the
here, right?
audience
So like
thinks that.
we'll go to a different example because Acts 12:4 doesn't seem to be sticking.
Can we talk about
So when
the
I
New
say
World
he moveth
Translation?
his tail like a cedar, the sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. You think that's wrong, right?
Okay, listen. The New World Translation. You said it's the occultic. How is it occultic?
Answer my question first. Is it
No,
wrong to translate? Is it wrong to translate?
New World
Hang on,
Translation.
no. This is about the modern versions. This is on topic. Is it wrong to translate sinews of his thighs in Job 40:17?
I think all the new translations are corrupt and wrong.
Okay, that didn't answer the question. Is that individual verse incorrect? Does it say sinew of his thighs or does it say sinew of his stones?
Is that Samson?
Not Exodus, sorry. Job 40:17. Does the word mean thighs or stones?
Which one are you quoting?
So the King James says stones. The New King James says thighs.
Yeah, obviously, I agree with the authorized version. Obviously.
Okay, so what do you have to demonstrate the word there is thighs, not stones?
Yeah. All right. Anyways, I don't have any evidence. You won the debate. Congratulations. You don't even read your email. All right. So
we're talking about the modern versions. The modern versions use the word thighs. No, you're not getting away with this. Okay, you're a very dishonest person, and I'm not dealing with it. The word that New King James, one of the Bibles you wanted to discuss, the word the New King James uses is thighs. Demonstrate to me that thighs is wrong.
I cannot demonstrate to you right now that thighs is wrong. Okay, just because I can't demonstrate that to you right now doesn't mean, one thing I really like about debating Charles is if he doesn't know, it's like, I don't know. And I don't go, see, you missed your wrong debate. Just because I don't know right now, I can't answer it, doesn't mean that I'm wrong or that somehow you won. Can we move on to the New World Translation? Because you said that it was occultic. How is it occultic?
It's literally produced by a cult.
Okay, but where is the ideology of the occult found in here?
I already gave one example, John 1.
Okay, but in the footnote it says divine.
Meaning what, though? That doesn't change anything.
Well, divine.
It translates the word as a God. It's not a God, it's God.
Okay. Now, with that said, the new versions say this. The new versions say Daniel 3:20-25. They say a son of the gods. They say a living God. And it's interesting because Daniel 3:25 is, I believe, absolutely talking about the Son of God, because Daniel 3:25 says the Son of God in the authorized version, and it says a son of the gods. Okay, you're agreeing with all the new versions. Acts 14:15 says a living God versus the living God. 1 Thessalonians 1:9 says a living, a true God, the living and true God. Knowing that your master also is in heaven. And so those are examples where the New World Translation says, specifically in Daniel 3:25, it says a son of the gods versus the son of gods. Do you have an issue with that verse in 3:25? Do you think it should be the son of God or a son of the gods?
Well, of course, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness, so I obviously would have problems with anything that refers to like that. But I don't think
the new versions, all the new versions say a son of the gods. So you just admitted that you have a problem with that verse, which all the new versions.
Can you give me that verse real quick?
That verse is Daniel 3:25. You just admitted it. Exactly. That's my point. You agree with this. If you think that for 1 second this is dangerous and untrustworthy, which you do, then what you're doing is, because this is, and you being a preferred King James person, you should know this. This right here is more aligned with the new versions than the King James version is aligned with the new versions. If we were in a Bible study right now, the one who would be in most disagreement with the group would be the King James Bible. And if you're a preferred, what does that communicate to the audience?
So I have the verses up, Daniel 3:25. There are certainly a lot of translations that do not say that. So New Living Translation says, "In the fourth looks like a god." The King James
What does the NIV
Bible
say?
I don't care what the NIV says.
What about the NASB?
NKJV says is like the Son of God, so that's another one there. NASB does say a son of the gods. That's interesting. I'd want to know why they do that. So I'll grant you on that one. But yeah, that's two Bibles already that aren't saying that. You just said all of them. One of the specific ones I'm picking up on the KJV directly says what the KJV says.
So all my NASB friends, they're all holding a Bible that agrees with the New World Translation, which is occultic according to you. Now, I like what you said about the evolution part. Now, when I say collectivism, by the way, I don't believe you can find in new versions that it's like, dude, it's teaching communism. Let me clarify. What I do believe is that a lot of the collectivist thought is being brought into the new versions, and you specifically see that through the gender neutral language. Okay, so now with that, with the gender neutral language, there's two things I want to get to. The gender neutral with your quote about Metzger. I want to ask, can you read that quote verbatim right now? Can you read that quote that you have, please? Because I want to match that with what I have. Can you read? Do you have that, CJ?
Yeah,
can
just
you put
one
my,
second. I was trying to
here.
put the. I just had to bring my dogs in here real quick. So let's see.
Can you put my? Let's do this, Johnny. Can you? Don't share my screen. Yeah. Wait, hold up. Let's go back and share, please. Share. This quote right here, by the way, just so the audience knows, I'll give you the documentary where it's from. I literally stopped and I told my kids, stop, be quiet. I'm trying to get it perfectly right. So we were not given a mandate to change anything. Like, the actual quotes that you read, can you read it verbatim right now?
Yeah, so he says...
No, don't read what I'm telling you. I want to see what you're reading.
No, I'm not reading.
And I hope you can share that in the comments or links. You don't have that actual quote?
Yeah, I have it's a Washington Post article from 1990.
No, let's
drop that right here if you'd like.
No, we're not reading the same thing. Definitely, like I said, yeah, not even close. All right, so you can stop sharing.
It's in the live chat now, or not in the live chat. In
well,
the
just read it.
now.
All you gotta do is just read the quote. That's all I want to know.
But you just asked me for it in the private chat.
Yes,
so don't act like you didn't ask for it.
No, I did. But what I'm asking for,
he says we are not
the
authorized.
Audience needs to know. Well, go for it. Sorry, go for it. Read it. I could share screen again. Share screen again, please.
So he says we never tampered with the meanings. For example, Zechariah 3:3 previously rendered as now Joshua was standing before the angel clothed in filthy garments, because now Joshua was dressed in filthy clothes as he stood before the angel. So gives an example there, and then he says,
this quote,
just a second. Okay.
We got time.
Says we are not authorized to change them. God remains our Father. Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and then addresses how the thee and thou differences are different.
So the audience, please take note of what he just read. What you're saying has nothing to do with the quote I'm reading, and I give my audience everything. If you can email me, and eventually I'll send my email, and I'll send you my slides. You can have everything. You can try to demolish it. All right, just want to get that clarified, because you're not quoting what I'm quoting. And that's a fact, and that would be a fact in the court of law. All right, you can stop sharing. Thank you. Now, you mentioned, so let's talk about evolution real quick. You obviously hate evolution. I hate evolution. It's disgusting. It's evil, and it's destroying our world. So you made the great point, super good point, that the NIV, one reason why you find it dangerous and untrustworthy, is that you think because they adapt to theory of evolution in Genesis 1, because they take away the first day and make it a day, right? Am I hearing you right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a perfect example of how because most of those translators, I'd probably say, I bet most of them are all evolutionists for sure. Like the Mike Heiser evolutionist type. You know, they think the first chapters are just like allegory. All right. So with that said, if that's one of your reasons why the NIV is dangerous and untrustworthy, why don't you tell the audience what the new versions say about, is it the day or is it a day?
Well, I can actually, because Bible Hub gives us the comparison of all of them, so we can tell you exactly which ones say which.
Go ahead and read some examples. Like do NASB and ESV and then the NKJV. Actually, NKJV is most likely going to match for the most part. It's the NKJV is a bridge Bible. It's a complete Trojan horse. But anyways, you can feel free to read it.
All right, so it would be Genesis 1:5 is probably the first use of that. Yeah, so we have NLT marking the first day, ESV, there was evening and morning the first day, BSB, there was evening and there was morning the first day, KJV, there was evening and there was morning the first day, NKJV, so there was evening and there was morning the first day. I can share this actually if you want to. The NASB does say one day, so that's problematic.
So the NASB is now problematic and potentially even dangerous and untrustworthy. And so,
okay, but I just quoted like 17 of them. Like you're just going to focus on the one, as if the other ones aren't modern versions.
Do you realize that a lot of the audience either used or using the NASB. One of the versions are most likely using in 95, and they're probably not going to go to the 2020 because they're going to realize that, yeah, the ideology definitely is injected in there. Therefore, MacArthur has to make this legacy standard Bible, which is nothing more than an updated NASB 95. I mean, that's a big deal, man. You admitted that evolutionary theory was injected in NIV, and you just demonstrated that it's injected in the NASB 95, probably in 2022.
Well, they have all three of them there, the 77, 95, and original.
Yeah, that's a bad deal. But again, that's my point, CJ. This has been this ideology, this globalist anti-God ideology is infecting the new versions and is getting in there.
Some of them certainly look, and that's the thing. I don't deny that some things can be influenced in some of these versions at all, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is, when we're talking about, this is why I read so many of them, and not just one of these single versions, right? Yeah. The New King James is a modern version. The Berean, and by the way, I don't even really like the Berean because I think the Berean reads weird in a lot of instances, but still said the same thing as the Genesis, right? And that's the point. Yeah. Which, just to be clear, this was the whole reason I was asking about standards in the first place. It's not a question about the KJV. It's a question about how do we know these are wrong? We need something to compare them to, right? Or obviously, the originals are going to be what we're going to try and compare them to, or the general witness of translations is another way you could say. But we need something to compare them to, right?
Here's my point. What I'm trying to tell you in the audience and demonstrate is that the ideology of occultism, aka Satanism, of dethroning God, essentially, dethroning Jesus Christ, the ideology of collectivism through gender ideology, and through the theory of evolution, and Catholicism especially, is being injected into new versions. I mean, we have the ESV has a Catholic Standard version. What? A Catholic Standard?
Yeah, but you know why they need a Catholic version, right?
So they can make
because
money.
Their Bible's different than ours.
So they can make money. That's why. And on top of that, because they are in partnership with the Vatican. That's why.
There's certainly some instances where that's the case, but you're entirely missing that.
Demonstrate that. Can you just demonstrate that? Where is that the case?
What, where they're doing stuff for money or something like that?
No, like where they're doing it, where they're in cahoots with the Vatican.
Well, so off the top of my head, I wouldn't have one that I can think of. As far as like the like which ones are which, I'm pretty sure the NIV had a lot of influence from the Vatican. Okay. But the reason that they have those Catholic versions, right? You notice that it's not just the NIV, it's the NIV sub-Catholic version, is because they do have differences, right? So, for example, their 10 Commandments are different than ours. It's a matter of the ordering. Do you split the idolatry and worship of God into two different commandments, or do you split the covetousness into two different commandments? They have to change that. Another example, they have the Apocrypha, right? The 7 different Catholic books that we don't have in our own Protestant.
They're not Catholic. You should know that. They're not Catholic. You know that.
Well, they're Catholic in the sense that they use them and we don't. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay. But, obviously, they're used by Orthodox. They're used by, Tawahedo down in Ethiopia. They're obviously much older than any of these churches, right? I grant that. But when I say Catholic, I just mean that they're not in our Protestant Bibles, right?
Well, that's not true, though, because they are in our Protestant. I have a King James Bible right now that has the Apocrypha. Geneva, all the early Protestant Bibles had the Apocrypha in between the Old Testament. So when you take, like, for example, you want to talk about manuscripts, like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, they have the Apocrypha books intertwined with the Old Testament. So they're not like, oh, that's separate. No, they're literally, everyone that's listening that is all pro new versions, and they love scholarship, and they love it all. They have to understand is their 2 primary manuscripts, which are missing books, which again adds to like, Aziz, really, can we have these confidence in these texts, of these manuscripts? But they also include the Apocrypha in the Old Testament. Now, according to their logic, since most of these people find the Apocrypha to be heresy, well, what is heresy doing intertwined with their Old Testament, with their oldest and best manuscripts?
Well, and that is a good question, but it's not a question I think that argues for the case here, right? Because the fact is, unfortunately, the early church, and you see this demonstrated through our Septuagint manuscripts, the early church was kind of iffy on what was and was not canon. Now, that doesn't mean that canon has changed, literally speaking. In other words, the canon is what God inspired, period. It's always been the same. It's not subject to what humans think, right?
But for those that think
Right, but there was discussion though in the early church, right? There was a lot of church fathers and stuff like that who did believe that the Apocrypha was scripture. There was also church fathers who did believe that certain canonical books of scripture weren't, right? Like Revelation had a lot of conversation about it and all that. Now, none of that is to say either of them are right or wrong. It's just to say that's the main reason we see stuff missing or added, is because unfortunately there's a lot of dispute over this stuff at the time.
Yes, and we agree a lot more on this topic than disagree. But there are people there are people listening, and I get this all the time, especially when I'm in my last debates. I'm quoting Apocrypha when I debated you. I mean, I go back, I literally read every single side chat, and it's just like, you can't use those verses, you can't use those books of the Bible. And I'm thinking, like, you used your Greek manuscripts, put it in their Old Testament. So okay, so we got that. Is there it like? I mean, I think that we really agree on a lot. And you being a KJV preference person, I'm baffled at how you would want, like, why you would even want to defend like these new versions. Just tell me, like, what makes you want to defend these new versions when you've already demonstrated that a lot of, like, not a lot, but like some of the major ones are actually truly dangerous and untrustworthy. Like, why? Why would you go so far?
Yeah,
especially since you're a Protestant that holds to the fundamentals of the faith, and that we're so aligned now today with the Vatican. Like, why would you even think about entertaining that type of relationship?
Well, so this is unfortunately going to be kind of a multifaceted answer because it is complicated. But I'll try and be as quick as I can, and let me know if I'm getting outside of.
How much time do we have, Donnie?
That is a good question, actually.
Good question. You have, let's see, time is flying by, and I'm saving last minute questions right now. Technically, we've got about 8 minutes because CJ, I took the minutes you didn't use in your opening statement and I threw them into the discussion. So I would say about 8 minutes, gentlemen.
Thank you, Donnie.
All right. So yeah, well, 8 minutes is plenty of time. I'll probably only take less than half of that for sure. So the first reason is because I don't think this is an issue people should be dividing or attacking each other over. For example, John MacArthur has, his outlook over the Legacy Standard Bible. I don't think that John MacArthur is like a Vatican pawn or anything like that. And I think a lot of people will go that far, and I think it's unnecessary. The second reason is there are areas the KJV can be improved on. And it's not any area that's going to be theologically significant, but one of the reasons I really harp on the Easter one has nothing to do with it being important because it's a small thing. But the reason is because I often get in conversations with like the Holly haters or Scroogists or whatever you'd like to call them, right? These people who they really don't like the fact that people celebrate Easter, and they make all these crazy conspiracy theories, and a lot of times they'll reference things like Acts 12:4, and it's like, okay, well, Acts 12:4 was not referencing Ishtar, wasn't any of that kind of stuff.
I agree.
And I'm not saying that you're guilty of this, right? But what I'm saying is if we just fixed, for example, that problem, we already have an improvement, right? This is one of the reasons I harp on the NKJV versus KJV, is because the NKJV, for the most part, I see as an improvement on the KJV. Now, I am still KJV preferred. There are two reasons for that. The first one is I do enjoy the fact that it's regal. In other words, I like my Bible sounding like Bible, right? I don't want it to speak in plain English. I like "Thus saith thou art" and that kind of stuff.
So you're okay with it changing Hades? You're okay with it saying Hades instead of hell when nobody out there says, man, you're going to go to Hades when you die. We all say you're going to go to hell. Are you okay with something like that with the NKJV?
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with that. Because
you think that's updating the language though? Like, you think that's improving things?
Well, so I guess that's an interesting question there, right? Is that improving things? There's an argument to be had, because on one end, nobody really knows what Hades is. On the other end, that's a little bit of a problem when it comes to our theology, because Hades and Gehenna are not the same thing, but they're both translated as hell, right? Now, Hades and Sheol are likely the same thing, both translated as hell. But the fact of the matter is, I think that, that question is a little bit more complicated than some of the other questions, because of the fact that using hell blanketly for both does appear to be a little bit of a problem. And by the way, one of the things that I do prefer over the modern translations, though this isn't necessarily a problem I have with the NKJV, but I do like the fact that the KJV is incredibly conservative, right? has those things like the first day. It always has the problem, quote unquote, passages in there. I don't trust any Bible that starts removing verses, which is one of the big reasons the NIV goes out for me, because it starts to remove a bunch of verses and it goes from Acts, such and such to Acts such and such, skipping like 3 verses or 1 verse, or sometimes even entire 12 verses, like the pericope adultery, right? That's very problematic. But when you have these sorts of reasons as to like, well, okay, why would you prefer one or the other? It is, for the most part, in regards to those two, the NKJV or the KJV, it has mostly to do with the sound of it. Frankly, I think that the KJV, it sounds like a Bible, right? It sounds like it's poetic, it's regal, it's higher than everything else. When I go to listen to Shakespeare, I don't want it to come out like Calvin and Hobbes, right? Well, the Bible's greater than anything Shakespeare's ever put out. I don't want that to sound like Calvin and Hobbes either.
Okay. All right. So do you think the New King James Version is actually the 5th edition, even though it uses the biblical Hebraica for the Old Testament, relies on the Dead Sea Scrolls, adds critical textual readings within the margins for the reason of basically extending its hand out to new versions? It's actually even been called like a bridged Bible. And also, if you go to their website, I'm trying to find it, I apologize, they actually have a question and answer about whether or not is New King James Version an actual, like, what makes it different? And it specifically says that the new versions are literally there to try to replace the King James Version. They actually admit that. And then they say that, but the New King James Version is nothing but it's an extension of the King James Bible. 2 big things right there, but I guess let's focus on like what makes you think that it's actually another edition of the King James, when actually a lot of people now are starting to admit, no, it's actually a completely new Bible, a completely new translation.
Well, I wouldn't use that terminology, because it is the reason we call it NKJV instead of, like we don't call the 1769 Blaney revision.
You know why we call it that, right? You know why we call it NKJV? Because it's actually marketed that. And again, that goes to my point early on. They're falsely marketing something that's actually not true. So that's actually, like, my King James Bible is not King James or authorized. It's just Holy Bible. That's actually what it was. The New American Standard, which is not standard, the NIV is, excuse me, let's go back to like books that have standard in them. They're not standards. That's a lie. That's not true at all. But as far as the New King James, that's why I said in my opening statement, it's neither new nor is it King James. And the reason why you call it NKJV, it's really Thomas Nelson Bible or Sherry Falwell Bible, is because that's how they market it. So they got it into the psyche, and then they paid for it, and here we are, we're talking about the NKJV. That's why we're talking about it.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think they call it the NKJV because it is in the same textual tradition. Now, it's not the same thing as, for example, the 1769 Blaney revision, right? The 1769 Blaney revision is going to be kind of updating language in the sense, not really updating language, it's more like updating terminology. But nonetheless, the point is, it's still like editing errors from the original version, right? Or changing some spellings, like, for example, using a J instead of an I or something along those lines, right? Whereas the NKJV is actually doing a full-on update. It is saying, hey, we think we got this wrong, and this wrong. We're going to change it. And also, it's obviously updating to completely modern English rather than just simply updating spellings and stuff like that, like James instead of James, right? So it is a new version, but it's a version which attempts to evolve off of the versions we have before, right? And actually, similarly, you could say that the KJV and the Geneva are related to each other in that same way. They're not the same version, but it's one attempting to improve off of the other.
Well, they're all related in some sense. We have a minute left, so I'm going to be quick. They're all related in some sense, obviously. You obviously see the King James, the authorized version, influence in all versions. That's a fact. There's no question about that. But what I'm telling you is that the way the NKJV markets itself is completely false. It's not true. That's what I'm getting at. There are countless. There's. I have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost 6 pages of archaic words in the New King James Version. So that's going to be 100 plus. On top of that, they changed so many times, like thousands of times, words that were in the King James. There was no need to update. Like for Hades, they're not making it in the readable language today. Like unless you're like a lover of the movie Hercules from Disney, But other than that, I don't see really good evidence that we should be calling it really a New King James Version. What I do think we should be calling it is the Thomas Nelson Version. And that they through their marketing, millions of dollars, they've deceived countless people.
Well, if you'd like to call it that, I think that's certainly fine. I do just want to, is with the last sort of question here, I just want to ask, do you think there's a problem with translating Gehenna and Hades as hell?
Isn't that how the King James translate it?
Yeah, it translates them both as hell.
No, I'm not going to, this will get into theological discussion, but honestly, I think hell, the term, it's a covering, it's the helmet. So I think, but today, in today's world, most people think of it as just flames of fire. That's it.
All right, gentlemen, that is a wrap on the discussion. Again, fantastic debate. This really was very enjoyable, and gentlemen, some really awesome points you both discussed. So, all right, we're moving into the closing statement. So that means we have 10 minutes for the audience to send in any last minute questions for the audience Q&A. Okay, David, since you started with your opening, we'll have you start with your closing. And whenever you're ready, you've got 5 minutes. Just let me know when to start your timer.
All right, hold up, don't start it yet, and then I'll ask you to please share the screen when I'm ready. Hold on 1 second. All right. I'll tell you when to start the screen. No, not yet. All right. Well, CJ, thank you, man. It's a pleasure. This is my second debate with you, and I'm not going to say too much right now because I only got so much time. But man, thank you, bro. I really appreciate it. It's a joy that we're doing this. And this is huge. So if we take a look real quick, I want to share this with you because I probably spent hours and I've taken years to come up with this. But basically what I've been trying to demonstrate today is that there is a relationship between proto-Catholicism, collectivism, evolutionism, and the occultism. And all those people that you see in red all have a direct connection with none other than Westcott and Hort in some form or fashion, either directly or indirectly. And if you take a look at history, if you look at history and you take a timeline from each category, you'll see that there is definitely a relationship. Now, I'm not going to go into this. I wish I could, but I'm telling you, if you were just to take a look at it and dissect it, pause screen, you'll see that there's a direct connection between proto-Catholicism, collectivism, evolutionism, and occultism. And this is what I'm getting at. I'm driving at this fact right here that these two men in the middle right here, Westcott and Hort and FJA Hort, Westcott and Hort are directly connected with the men you see right before you see Cardinal Newman right above them. They were in love with him. They really appreciate him very much. They read his writings. They found him to be a very helpful theologically. But yet, this is the man who went rogue. He was part of the Oxford movement, very influential, and he decided to say, you know what, I'm going to leave Protestant Christianity. I'm going to go to the Vatican. To the far left, Marx. Both these men had some sort of appreciation for Marx. They were both socialists. They were socialists by today's definition, for sure. They actually were also very enthusiastic. They had an appreciation for Darwin in his book. I don't know if he actually met them in person, but there is record in one of their writings that they did go to a dinner that was related to when he was given an honorary degree, and where they actually got to spend time with Thomas Huxley, not Aldous Huxley, but Thomas Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, and they got to spend time with Mr. Galton, who we all know promoted the theory of eugenics, which eventually gave rise to the Planned Parenthood, which eventually gave rise to Nazi Germany, and all the wicked things we did here in the United States, which the Nazi Party looked as defense when they were sent to Nuremberg. I digress. So anyways, to the far left, we see Mr. Alfred Balfour, who was close friends with both of these men, was part of some of their secret societies, and Arthur Balfour had a very large part in the foundation of the League of Nations, and he was also friends and he was partners in some way with Mr. Dulles, who, like I mentioned earlier, was part of the National Council of Churches, which was then called the Federal, and then as such was related to the plans for globalism and eventually a united Babel world. This is where we're going, people. This is what I've been trying to communicate with you. Oh, sorry, I forgot. And Mr. Sidgwick on the far left had a very, let's just say, interesting history with the new sexual revolution we have today. I heard a quote, and there was this: we must abide, sorry, it's not exact quote, so excuse me, but essentially, as science and and sexuality progresses, theology must progress with it. That's not my quote. I don't agree with it. But ladies and gentlemen, that's where we're headed. In 2020, 2021, and now 2022, our faith has been under attack like never before. If you are ignorant of the fact that we saw so many signs pointing to what we've been trying to communicate to you all for the past many years, God help you. Lastly, I want to recommend some books real quick while I have a minute left. I actually had the opportunity to meet David Daniels. I drove up to Chick Publications yesterday, had a wonderful conversation with him. I tried to challenge him in some way, tried to figure out what was going on. But I'm telling you, we didn't get into this. This is huge, but you got to understand there's a possibility that Codex Sinaiticus is a forgery. As you see right there's a picture of me. You see that he literally took all of them, because there's 4, they're all divided up in 4 locations. He went and he made it one big poster with all of it. So that's literally all of Sinaiticus, even though it's divided up, I believe, right now in four locations. But anyways, I highly recommend his books. They're fascinating. I recommend these 2 documentaries by Mr. Pinto. Amazing. They go in a lot more detail when I went in today, but they definitely will prove the point beyond a shadow of doubt. The new versions are dangerous and untrustworthy. This is the documentary, everyone, that we're all arguing about earlier. I highly recommend it. The Bible Under Fire. It's actually created by the National Council of Churches. So, oh my goodness, you got to watch it. Anyways, all right. Lastly, here's some books I want to recommend, and they're fascinating. And if you'll give me one more minute, Johnny, that'd be great, because I'm literally almost done. So my timer's about to go off, so I apologize. But anyways, these are 3 books I highly recommend. Collectivism in Churches. That's a book you won't put down. That book, nobody knows about that book. James White, they don't know about that book. You read that book, you're going to find out a lot of amazing things about what's really going on in the world. Okay, again, I'm just going to repeat. Here it is. A modern version translation, James Untrustworthy. Dangerous and untrustworthy, excuse me. Yes, they are. I demonstrated today, right here, that the modern English versions are found on untrustworthy and dangerous manuscripts, Greek texts, and are under the influence of the Vatican and this world system. 2, I demonstrated many of the primary men involved in making New English versions were influenced by the theory of evolution, collectivism, socialism, and communism. Modern liberal leftist philosophy, and even the occult, many of these beliefs influence how their versions were produced. You know what? You can read that for yourselves, everyone. But basically, what I'm trying to tell you is that right here, the new versions all agree with the New World Translation. They promote that the Holy Spirit is man of sin. They promote collectivist ideology through gender-neutral ideology. They lie through their marketing. They're not the standard. They don't eliminate archaic words. They're not based on the oldest and best manuscripts. It is nothing but a con job. It's time to wake up and get out of the matrix. If you need me, contact me at 1john57@gmax.com. And last but not least, when a man who is honestly mistaken hears the truth, he will either quit being mistaken or cease to be honest. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much there, David Preston, for your closing statement. CJ, we'll hand it over to you now. And you have equal time, so we'll give you a 6 minute, up to 6 minute closing statement. Whenever you're ready, CJ, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I do want to thank Donnie for hosting this debate, as well as the audience for participating and listening, and Mr. Preston for having the conversation with me. Despite any of the heatedness, I actually do always appreciate these conversations, even the heated ones, because those tend to be the ones, the more passionate ones are the ones you need to be having, right? So I hope nobody takes my heated rhetoric or anything like that as an indication that I wouldn't do this again if asked, because I totally would. Proverbs 27 reads, and you guys already know where I'm going with this if you've seen my debates before. Verse 2, let another man praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. So anybody here who thought that I brought up convincing arguments, if your opinion was changed, or if you already had the same opinion as me and it was just solidified, please do let me know. I shouldn't be the one who's saying that I won. You guys should be the ones who are saying I won, if indeed I did. Excuse me. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. Excuse me. So if you guys thought that I did a terrible job, if you were not convinced, if you actually came to this believing my position and ended up thinking David did a better job and are now leaning towards his position, once again, please you be the ones to tell me. And of course, do all in a 1 Peter 3:15 spirit. We always do want to make sure that we are trying to be edifying, right? That we are trying to be loving, that we are trying to glorify God. And that's the main reason why I covet these criticisms, right? Is because the only reason to do this is not just to serve the body, but most importantly, to serve God. I apologize, friends. So A couple things that I think that we saw established in this debate, and I want to go ahead and draw some conclusions. The first thing that I think we saw established here is when we have a question passage, insert any of the ones that I quoted here, Job 40:17, Acts 12:4, whatever it happens to be. When we have a question passage, we need to know what is the outside source we can use to demonstrate X is wrong, Y is right. And I think we had demonstrated today the KJV Onlyists can't do that. This is different from the KJV, even though the Geneva and some other previous Bibles would be there as well, but they fall outside the purview of our conversation today. And that's why that's how we determine that these are wrong. That's how we determine that Easter is correct, or that stones is correct, or that kill is correct, or any of those sorts of things. I think that is a problem. I think we also saw demonstrated that a lot of the problem passages, quote unquote, aren't actually problem passages when we look at them. For example, when it comes to 2 Thessalonians 2:7, I do appreciate that Mr. Preston is in fact a pre-mill, pre-rapture kind of guy, and that he disagrees with the interpretation given there. That's perfectly fine. So I will take back the totality of my statement, but I would say the majority of pre-mill people are certainly going to take 2 Thessalonians 2:7 to be referencing the Holy Spirit. That's primarily a question of your eschatology, or at least it tends to dictate your eschatology. Obviously not always, because Mr. Preston exists, but nonetheless, I still think that is very true for the most part. The bigger example, I think, was in our usages of the words like anthropos, or man, right? Most of the passages that are said to be gender neutral are, in fact, gender neutral. It is, if any human comes to, no human can come to be except by the Father who draw him, or anything like that, right? The word there being used is the Greek anthropos. Anthropos, like man, like Adam, like human, is ultimately a gender neutral term in some contexts, right? In this particular context, it certainly is. And I think we saw that demonstrated pretty clearly as well. I will say the NASB has some problems that I discovered today, and I'll even grant that. That's a little olive branch to the other side. NASB had some problems I was not aware of, but for the most part, Lamsa and KJV, a lot of these other Bibles that we came here to defend, I think we saw a pretty solid job demonstrated here. I think we also saw some examples of inconsistency in how we're looking at these sorts of things. For example, the question was asked, do you find Calvinism to be problematic? Now, of course, I'm a Calvinist. This doesn't apply to me, but many KJV Onlyists are not. The answer was yes. I personally think a lot of people would have answered yes with the high ecclesiology question too. People who have those really structured churches tend to scare off specifically Baptists who have a idea of the primacy of the local church. But all of the KJV writers are high ecclesiology, are Calvinistic. So why is it that that's not a problem for them, or the fact that we have William Shakespeare, drunkard and a pervert, potentially working on it, and King James, who was definitely bisexual, or at least there was a lot of people from his time who certainly thought he was, and he's the one who's deciding that it's going to be written. Not a problem for the KJV, is a problem when we get to these other versions. It's incredibly inconsistent, right? And ultimately, what is the point of this conversation? The point is, we can't sit here and tell somebody, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm not going to fellowship with you, I'm not going to be in the same pews as you because you use a different Bible than me. That is, in my opinion, making a mountain out of a molehill, and that's what tends to happen with these KJV things. We turn it into this big brouhaha where everybody splits the church, right? And it's not necessary. It's not necessary. Both of these versions, NKJV and KJV, or other versions like them, like Lamsa and so on, are saying, for the most part, the same things. And almost always, when they're not saying the same things, the modern translation is actually right. And with that, I'll go ahead and concede. I appreciate this debate. And join me on an after show if anybody wants to come grill me.
All right, gentlemen, CJ and David, great job in this very important debate. We're moving into some audience questions. So right before we do, though, I will say this debate concluded another week-long debate marathon. We had 5 this week. We have another 4 next week, starting with another debate in the Evolution Debate Challenge series. I think we're close to about 40 of these so far this year alone. Kent and Horazio, can evolutionary mechanisms explain the diversity of life? the very next day, I believe it is, or at least the day after. We've got 4 next week, so they're kind of spread out. We have another King James only debate, Will Kinney debating Mark Gageton. And we've also got Matt Slick and Stanley Terry. They'll be debating was Jesus fully God and fully man during his earthly ministry? And of course, the much anticipated round 2 between Charles Jennings, David Preston, the great James 2 debate. So, gentlemen, all right, break time's over. We're getting right into some of these questions, and let's get the first one up here, and it comes in from Image Bearer. This one is for CJ. CJ, the questioner asks, "Why are you KJV preferred?"
It's an excellent question. So I kind of answered it a little bit, but there's 3 very quick answers. Number 1, I prefer the regality of it. I prefer the fact that the language is high language rather than low language. We tend to lose that kind of thing in modern America, but that's, I think, a good way to, kind of set apart, holy texts from non-holy texts. And most other religions, including most other Christian denominations like Anglican and stuff like that, they actually do that. Not that means it's right. It's just something that I think makes sense. The second reason is to avoid fights like this when I'm witnessing. If I have somebody who's saying that the KJV is the only Bible and I'm wanting to witness to them about anything, for the most part, it is better to just completely avoid this fight and say, all right, fine, let's just use the KJV, which is very important when you're arguing with Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Black Hebrew Israelites, people whose texts either derive from the KJV or, in the case of like a Black Hebrew Israelite, they're KJV onlyist, right? And then the third reason is conservatism. With the exception of very small amount of Bibles, for the most part, I do find the King James Version to be more conservative than other versions. I don't know if that's necessarily always intentional. Very often, I think that the conservative thing is a matter of kind of preference on my part, but I do think it can lead to problems down the road if you're not being conservative. So those are the main reasons. And if anybody wants to know, my two versions I use outside of the KJV would be NKJV and Lambda.
CJ, appreciate the response. David, if there's anything you'd like to add, go ahead.
Well, as you probably figured out, I'm not preferred. I would be labeled as a KJV only. And I'd like to add real quick that I wasn't raised like this. My first person I met that was actually of the same opinion as me was a German-speaking Austrian missionary to the city of Munich when I was 19 years old. So I didn't grow up in a family like that. In fact, my stepfather went to seminary, so we had a lot of debates and definitely disagreed with me a lot. I read White at a very early age and all the critics. So at the end of the day, it's come down to this one part of who I am. I'm attracted to some final authority, and by faith, I believe that the authorized version, based upon strong evidence, is the actual word of God. And so when I'm reading it, I read it as the word of God, and that's essentially what it comes down to. That by faith, I believe that, and there's plenty of evidence that supports that.
All right, thank you for that input there, David. If you wanted a quick final word on that, CJ, go ahead.
Mute, CJ.
Oh,
you're on sound.
CJ, you're good now.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer a question that I found here in the live chat about why would I prefer a Bible that I think is authored by a reprobate. I never said King James was a reprobate. I said that he was a bisexual, and I did provide some evidence for that in the live chat. People around him very often were saying this. This is stuff that derives from his time. For example, the quote I have down here is from Thomas Howard, Earl of Suffolk. He wrote that in 1611. 1611 is absolutely that's the year that the King James Bible was published, right? So now that doesn't mean that he always was a bisexual. It doesn't mean that he was, always in this non-religious state of mind or anything like that. But it's something that I think is very easily demonstrable. And the point of it is just to say we can't be using unequal measures here. I completely disagree, though, that makes him a reprobate. I think that that's a false, probably NIFB ideology, and I'd love to debate it at some point.
David, if you wanted to respond, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll respond real quick. Well, first off, you got zero strong evidence to support your case, and you shouldn't come on a debate and throw an accusation to somebody that you can't defend, because that's shameful. So
I can read the quote.
Wait. First off, he was surrounded by so many men that didn't like him. Okay. And a lot of them actually had really, really good things to say. But I'm just telling you, for someone who's been researching King James for 20 years, and I've read King James Unjustly Accused, I read all the early Christianity Today articles back 20-something years ago, it's so sad to hear people go to these tiny bit of people who are his enemies. But as far as like John Reynolds and all of them, if they wanted to bash him for anything, that would be the one thing you bash him for. But they didn't. So again, your evidence is lacking, and I recommend to everybody, please read the King James Works. You can get the PDF file for free online, but it's a wonderful book. It's him talking. It's him saying in his own words. So go ahead and listen to the trash talkers. You're all it is gossip. TMZ. That's what you're doing, CJ. TMZ. That's what you're doing.
Okay, so I do have the quote here. It's from Thomas Howard.
I don't care.
Suffolk, 1611. So this is a contemporary.
I'm not saying
also not a Catholic. The king leans on his, meaning Cars, Robert Cars, who he's talking about. The king leans on his arm, pinches his cheeks, smooths his ruffled garment, and when he looks upon Carr, directs his speech to others. That's only one of the many quotes.
Yeah, so that means he's a bisexual. Congratulations.
Yeah, what evidence do you expect me to find? Pictures of him having sex with men? Are you kidding me?
Nothing. No. Okay. Anyways, we go on next question. You just totally just blew it.
Oh, there's no evidence from the time. Literally reads a quote from the time. Oh, that's not evidence.
Saying is a bisexual. By the way, he was weak and sickly. And when you read things in context, everyone, let me recommend one more thing. This is not about King James, okay? But let me say this. If you want to understand the context in which he talks, get the book King James Unjustly Accused. That does a fascinating job at addressing petty little TMZ comments like CZ just made.
Historical evidence is TMZ comments, friends. Just want to get that clear.
On record, I don't think King James was a bisexual. I don't think the evidence is very strong. I'm moderator, but I just think it's almost kind of slander. He's not around right now. It's a lot of hearsay, gossip. So I don't know, CJ. I'd recommend not using that argument anymore. But I'm moderator. I just have to go on record. I don't think the evidence for that is very strong. So, but we'll move on here. Okay, so this one comes in from Chase Dowell, $5 super chat, and this one's for you, CJ. So Chase asks, CJ, you said the NKJV is an improvement to the KJV. Why would you prefer an inferior text? Because it sounds better.
So I basically already answered that, but the one thing I'll add to it is I don't think that the KJV's errors are severe. I don't think, for example, that we're getting a doctrinal problem from understanding Acts 12:4 to be saying Easter instead of Passover. That's just it's really more of like a historical thing. The historical evidence is a little bit wrong there. It can lead people to really wrong assumptions and arguments, like the Scrooge's crowd that likes to argue Easter is pagan. But that's not the intention of the text. That's not what you would immediately get just taking the text prima facie. And there's plenty of other examples like that. Same thing with Job 40 and 17. If you think that the sinews of his thighs are knitted close together rather than the sinews of his stones, okay, that's not going to bring into question whether or not the Exodus happened when it happened, or the earth is really young, or Adam really existed, or Jesus Christ rose from the dead, right? So the errors we do find in the KJV are, for the most part, what I would call, quote, aesthetic, meaning not that important. Things that are just going to make it, what's the word there that I'm trying to look for? Basically be more accurate in its pedantic points, right? If I was convinced that it had any serious error, then I would absolutely not use it.
All right, CJ, thank you for the response. Chase, thank you for the super chat, support, and question. David, if there's anything you'd like to add, go ahead.
Yeah, for the big thing is this, is like the new KJV is, like I said in the opening statement, it's not new and it's not the King James. It's sad that they did that. It's a marketing ploy. They did it because they latched on to the greatest book that's ever been printed and on earth, the most sold book, and that's what they did. It is dishonest. And their story in which how it came about, this guy his son didn't understand, how to read a Bible, so he wanted to go ahead and create a new Bible. There was like 5 already laying in front of his face. So I want to just recommend 2 books, please, for anyone who thinks that, like, one, the KJ new NKJV is KJV and it's inferior somehow. Like, I'm not even getting that. But I recommend this book by David Daniels. He does a great job. The Bridge Bible. He demonstrates, and he actually goes in detail with Mr. Moore, the guy who actually started the NKJV project to start. It's a great book. The other book I want to recommend in regards to language is Riplinger's book. Everyone talks about New Age Bible versions. No offense, Mrs. Riplinger. I don't think that's the greatest book you ever written. I think this book is much better. And it goes into language and why we say thee and thou, why it says what we say. Because you guys are just poetic. It's like, that's such a kindergarten, no offense, but that is a very, very low view of why they did what they did. Get her book, research. It's fascinating. It's God's word. He did it. He's the author of it.
All right. Thank you, David. CJ, question was for you. Get the last.
Yeah, I don't really know how to comment on that because it's just not accurate. And I don't think anything Gail Riplinger has ever done is even remotely trustworthy, to be honest with you. But that's just me. Yeah, no, I just think that this is, those are my reasons for it, and I could just leave it there, I guess.
All right. Thank you, CJ. Next question that comes in is, CJ, my recommendation, because of your echo, when you're done talking, maybe just hit mute. Sounds like a toilet's flushing every time someone talks after you finish talking. Okay, so this one comes in from Bumblebee. Standing for Truth. So it's a question for the both of you. If each interlocutor were tasked with verbally bringing the gospel to an uncontacted people, what book would they lead with? Since CJ answered the last question first, David, if you want to start, feel free to do so.
This is a great question. So early on, the Bible societies, specifically the Trinitarian Bible Society in the 1800s, which came from the United Kingdom Bible Society. And what you have to understand is when they were sending missionaries out, they all based them on the Textus Receptus and the King James. In fact, sometimes they would even translate directly from the King James Bible. So to answer your question specifically, what book would you lead with? Again, I would lead with the book I have, which is what I believe is the Scriptures, the Holy Scriptures. I don't believe it. I believe it's the Word of God, so I would definitely lead with the King James Bible. But understand this, that the early Bible societies, they did the same thing, and they bore much good fruit.
All right. And CJ, yeah, go ahead.
Well, the Bible I carry around is specifically a 1917 Schofield King James, so that would be the answer. But I would have no problem with any of the other Bibles which I own.
All right, gentlemen, appreciate the response to that.
Can I respond to that since it was directed to me or no? Sorry.
Well, it technically a question for both. So, okay, here, let's see. The next question comes in from, this one's for you, David. Image Bear. Question for SoCal Preston. What is the source of the Metzger quote?
Yeah, great question. All right, like I said in my debate, you probably ask this later, but you can share screen. Cool. All right, this is my source. I do not have the minute, but I promise you can take me to court if I'm wrong. Joking, but what I'm saying is the quote I did is directly from this film right here. So it's the story of the RSV, the NRSV by the National Council of Churches. So just look up the Bible in the Fire, type in RSV, you'll see it. It is mind blowing because it's the National Council of Churches doing their own video. So really, if I guarantee you that if the translators were in this debate, they'd be disagreeing with CJ, saying, no, David is actually right. He's representing our position very well. It blew my mind. I just actually saw this about a month ago when I was preparing for this debate. Never seen it before. No one's ever told me about it. And it's very telling. I highly recommend you take a look and watch it. But Metzger was a full-blown leftist liberal, and just God have mercy on his soul. And I believe he can be saved. I'm not denying that. But boy, he messed up. He did a lot of bad things, unfortunately, textually.
All right, thank you, David. CJ, anything you want to add?
You're on mute, CJ.
Thank you. I don't really have anything to add. It's just a question of where he got his source. So, answered it nice. We can get to some of the other questions.
All right, perfect. Okay, so let's see here. Next question. Trying to see one we didn't get to. Next
Can you
question.
stop sharing my screen? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. Next question comes in from Some Theology. Question for both. Question for both is for foreign Bibles, German, Spanish, etc. What is your favorite translation? Okay, when it comes to foreign Bibles. Whoever wants, if anyone wants to follow,
I'll answer that. Sure. All right, cool. So when I lived in Germany for a couple of years right after high school, and so this was a very important issue for me. So usually what I try to do is any Luther Bible that is more in line with this, because like I said, this is my standard, and with the Reformation texts that were used, I prefer to, I would not prefer, I would actually simply just recommend any Luther Bible that is in line with that. And I understand there's differences even in Luther, I get it. Spanish Bible, I recommend one of the older Retrovirus. Sorry, both my parents are from Mexico. So this is a very important issue. I have 2 Spanish Bibles that my grandmother owned behind me, so it's definitely near and dear to me. It's a very complicated topic because it's just, unfortunately, I'm going to be straightforward. The English versions are just a different story when you go into those languages. But I definitely believe they should be respected and honored. And if you look at the King James Bible, it specifically says out of the original James and with the former translations diligently compared and revised. So I don't in any way look at the old foreign language Bibles with a negative view.
CJ, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, to be honest, it's not a question I could necessarily answer because I don't speak another language. I mean, unless you want to count Hebrew, but I would be very careful with saying I speak Hebrew because I'm still learning it. But so I can't really answer. I'm sure it's going to vary from individual text to individual text, to be honest with you. So in other words, if you're going to have a Russian translation, then you'd have to go through all the different Russian translations and figure out which is best. I do think that there is some interest that I have with the answer given, though, just in this case, because the Martin Luther translation compared to our own early English translations does get a lot of stuff. We'll say divergent. We won't assume which one's right or wrong, but like for example, in Leviticus 18:22, the Martin Luther translation reads, "A man shall not lay with a boy." Now, obviously, in the English versions that we have from around the same time period, it's going to say a man shall not lie with a man, just as our modern translations would. The actual underlying Hebrew is zachar, which means excuse me, which means male. And in that particular instance, I think it's interesting that we would say that is okay. But the versions that we have here in English are also okay when they have a different understanding. That's just a full example, but nonetheless, I'm rambling. I just thought it was interesting.
No worries. David and CJ, thank you for your responses to that question. That was for the both of you. So this one now specifically for CJ comes in from Paul Anchor. Paul, thank you so much for your question. So he asked, question for CJ. Can you still defend the modern versions as trustworthy if they have omissions like the long ending of Mark, the woman taken in adultery, and others? CJ, go ahead.
Absolutely not. The long ending of Mark, the pericope adulterae, Father forgive them. They are all in the original texts. I can make an exception for texts which include it, but then put in the footnotes, we don't think this is original. The reason I do that is for the same reasons I would do so, for example, to the 1611 KJV, which still includes the 14 apocryphal books, but it also tells you, hey, these books I don't find to be apocryphal. We're keeping it to be safe. I appreciate that whole being safe thing, and more especially with things like the pericope adulterae, because unlike the apocrypha, which is false, pericope adulterae, longer ending, all that is going to be true. But if it just outright removes it, No, absolutely not. And even with that whole bracketed thing there where it's saying in the footnotes, hey, we think this might be wrong, I still get a little queasy about that. In fact, if I had to pick one problem with my Lanza translation, it is that in the footnotes it says we don't believe the pericope adulterae is originally here. It's not found in the original Peshitta, only comes much later on. But it does still keep it in the text, right? So in other words, John 7:53 to 8:11 is still there, but if you go down below to your footnotes, it'll say that we don't believe it's supposed to be. That level of carefulness I appreciate, but at the same time, I don't think that there's any solid reason to suggest the pericope adulterae is not there. And so, yeah, if it outright took it out, I'd say no. And I do get a little queasy with that, but I'll at least accept it.
Appreciate it, CJ. David, anything you'd like to add?
This is right here was displayed that the new versions are dangerous and untrustworthy, and that was the point of the debate to demonstrate that. And one of the things I pointed out when I brought up this occultic, untrustworthy, and dangerous version, the New World Translation, I'm holding the 1984 by the way. There's an original 2013. Is that the 2013 removes completely, doesn't even keep it in brackets, those two verses, those scriptures in which they're just referenced. And you could argue textually and all that stuff. I get it, and I'll leave that for Will and Chris. They do a fantastic job. Visit their website; it's fascinating. It's all been blessing me. But look, at the end of the day, look, if we're in a Bible study, and somebody has a New World Translation, and CJ goes in there with his authorized version, and there's others that have NASB and NIV and ESV. The one who's going to actually be excluded mostly is going to be the one who's holding the authorized version. And it just doesn't make any sense, especially since you're KJV Preferred. It just really goes against what you're trying to defend.
All right, David, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, CJ.
Sorry. Well, I will say to be fair, I do appreciate that last point in so much as I get really annoyed with, I, for example, love James White. When he starts saying that, he'll go as far as to say the KJV is a bad version. I don't like that at all. I think, and I completely disagree with him on it. And I completely disagree with him on his opinions on the pericope adultery and stuff like that too. So I do appreciate the comment. At the same time, though, I do want to point out, I do think that, this is going to be something that once again is going to vary version to version. For example, in that 2013 edition you just gave out, the fact that the 2013 edition removed it implies that the earlier edition still had it. So it's still going to depend. It's still going to vary. We can't say blanketly that they're all false. We can just say that certainly some of them are. And I would never deny that. Some of the modern translations are certainly not good. I mean, the message exists, right? And that's an absolute dumpster fire of a Bible translation. So at any rate.
All right, gentlemen, we made it. You both have endured to the end of this epic debate. I really did enjoy this. It's an important topic, and nothing wrong with, getting passionate at times. And at the end of the day, we shake hands and we say good job. And that really was an awesome debate. Comprehensive. Doesn't feel like 3 hours. So it's been a 3-hour debate. It really does not feel like 3 hours. Great Q&A, some great questions, great responses from the both of you gentlemen. To the audience, thank you so much for being so engaged with this topic, sending in super chats, super stickers, questions, just kind of showing the love, and also appreciation to the time that the debaters have given to us. Because I like to say, if it weren't for you guys being so generous with your time, we wouldn't have so many awesome debates to enjoy. So before we completely shut it down, 2 things. CJ, I understand you're having an after show, and I do have it pinned right now for anybody that wants to continue the conversation. And secondly, some final words, final thoughts from the debaters tonight. So CJ, why don't we start with you? Brother, thank you so much for doing this. And yeah, final words, final thoughts.
Yeah, just say I appreciate the conversation. I knew that I was going to be in the minority here because, this is just I've been here long enough that I know the general flavor of the audience we have here. So I appreciate those of you guys who stuck with the debate anyways, even if it was for David and not for me. If you want to give me any questions or holler at me or anything like that, definitely consider showing up at the live show, as long as you're respectful, which nobody here has ever shown me a reason they wouldn't be. Then you have every right to be there. We'll welcome you, and I appreciate you guys. That'll be everything there.
Awesome. Appreciate it. CJ, thank you so much for those final words, final thoughts. And for those that enjoy watching a CJ debate, we do have him back here coming up in a week or two. We've got the great hell debate, I guess you could say, annihilation versus eternal conscious torment, plus a couple more debates for September and October. So the fun continues. David, thank you, brother, for being here. Thank you for your time. And some final words, final thoughts.
Well, thank you, Donnie. Again, as always, you're an awesome moderator. You have a great show. You're doing a great thing for the body of Christ and for those who aren't even saved. You're exposing them to the truth. So thank you for this opportunity. We haven't had a debate like this, I think, ever that I know of. And I've tried to find them on YouTube, but it's specifically what we focused on today. The proto-Catholicism mixed with the collectivism, mixed with the evolutionism, mixed with the occultism. I mean, yeah, we really touched here and there little things, but for the most part, if someone were to go back and even just look at some of the books I referenced and some of the slides, that alone would convince you that, yes, the new versions are definitely dangerous and untrustworthy. So I stand, yes, this is my standard, the authorized King James Version, or for many years it was just called the Bible until all the confusion, division, doubt came. But ultimately, at the end of the day, my focus was the new versions, and that's what I was trying to demonstrate to the audience, that they were untrustworthy and dangerous. And it's important because our faith should be rooted in a strong and the final authority, which is right here. And lastly, I'll just recommend an amazing book I mentioned in the closing statement I had earlier, but it's a book entitled Collectivism in the Churches. Look, no matter where you're at on this, on the fence, you've got to read this. This was so eye-opening. I never even knew that the case of the RSV went all the way to Congress, and there's a congressional record investigation within whether or not the communists were part of the RSV. It blew my mind. I had no idea about John Foster Dulles and his involvement in the National Council of Churches. And so that's why when I learned all that, I made that chart of it showing the four categories. It stunned me. And I'm telling you, people, get the book, Collectivism in the Churches, of blow your mind. Thank you again, Donnie. Thank you, CJ. I really appreciate you, brothers.
Awesome. Thank you so much there, David, for those final words, final thoughts, and kind words. CJ, David, again, thank you so much for doing this. To the audience, thank you so much. Since this concludes another week of a debate marathon, 5 debates this week, tomorrow we do have off. Therefore, I am going to let the debaters out, and they've both deserved the night off. And, CJ's got an after show. And then I'm going to stick around for a couple minutes, just going over some reminders and announcements for next week. So that being said, we'll see you in about 10 seconds. And David and CJ, God bless. Gentlemen, we'll talk soon. All right, there we go. As I like to say, another one in the books. I think that makes for about 215 debates, roughly between 212 and 215 that we've now hosted and moderated. Debates on all sorts of topics, theology, the Bible translation issue, creation, evolution, of course, ancestry, morality, soteriology, eschatology, with some eschatology debates coming up. Truth Defenders, good to see you, brother. By late, yes, the debate is now over, but at least you're here for the announcement. So I hope everybody enjoyed tonight's debate, and also the 3rd or 4th debate marathon week that we've had this summer. I promised you it would be the summer of debates, and we've had events nearly every single day. And September is really going to be no different, because first thing in September, we've got some big debates, but we've also got our Defending Genesis conference, technically from September 5th to the 9th, because we're going to end the conference on the 9th with a debate on evolution between Ken Hovind and David Emery, specifically macroevolution. But from September 5th to the 8th will be all of the presentations, the lectures, the Q&A, so on and so forth. And we have about 8 speakers and 2 shows a night. So, of course, I'm going to be speaking, and Matt Naylor is going to be speaking, George Baum, Professor David McQueen, Dr. Jerry Bergman, Joseph Hubbard, Sal Jardina, CJ Cox. He'll be countering compromise. T-Rock, he'll be giving a presentation on isochron dating. So it's going to be a full week. It's going to be a heavy week. It's going to be a busy week, but it's going to be a very edifying, a very comprehensive week of shows, defending Genesis. And as always, we do our conferences live. We want them to be recorded. We want them to be up on the channel for you, and we want to do them live so the audience can benefit from them, and the audience, both critics and non-critics alike, can send in their questions, their comments, their feedback, their criticisms, and then that way the speakers can do their best at addressing the questions and objections that may come through. So that's going to be a huge Cheryl. Appreciate that. The chat mods have really delivered. So it's been a busy summer, and you all have done a fantastic job moderating the chat, keeping things professional, keeping things sophisticated, and keeping things in order. So I do appreciate that. You've all done a fantastic job. Doki Doki Bible Club. Yes, in 2 weeks. And 2 weeks will be here in no time, because wow, time has really flown by. The summer has flown by. So that means September will be here in no time, which is why I'm booking for October, November now. So I'm getting a lot of requests, and I've seen a couple people in the chat. I'm a little bit behind on emails because of this debate marathon. I've also got a couple books that I'm working on behind the scenes. I'm really trying to get the special creation book updated and expanded. It's going to be almost a totally different book, actually. I've got one of them behind me, the old one, but it's expanded. It's going to be well over an additional 100 pages with some of the most up-to-date information pertaining to the ancestry debate. So I really want to get that out, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So pretty much spending the days finishing that book up when I'm not here live. I've also got a follow-up. It's going to be more so, it's going to be a shorter book, follow-up to the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook, refuting the critics. So just going over some of the objections that basically have come in over the last few months of release in terms of the ERV handbook. So I will be catching up on emails and debate requests that have come in this weekend. So tonight and tomorrow. And so it looks like we're going to have November and December probably filled up very shortly as well, with debates on soteriology, the nature of God, and also the Evolution Debate Challenge series. So I've just booked a couple more of those for September. So September is going to be packed with evolution debates as well. And of course, at the end of this month, Kent Hovind's 300th debate, and what a debate. So we've got evolutionary biologist Dr. Jay Bundy, and he, I believe, graduated under Dr. Richard Lenski. So I'm sure anybody who follows the creation versus evolution debate knows who Lenski is, a Lenski experiment, right? And Dr. Bundy's actually worked, and I believe continues to work directly in that experiment. And then, of course, Dr. Dino. So this will be Evolution on Trial. This will be the main event. This will be at the very end of August. And another debate marathon this week. So this time 4 debates rather than 5, but still pretty packed nonetheless. And it's all going to start with another evolution debate challenge debate. So can evolutionary mechanisms explain the diversity of life? Horazio and Kent. That'll be on Monday. So tomorrow, again, we have off. We'll be doing some behind the scenes work tomorrow, but I also really want to get the website updated because it hasn't been updated in a few months. And although the website is packed with content, we've put out so much over the last few months that I really want to get it all up there on the website. So, we're working full time, and there's just not enough time in the day. So if you guys want to, if it's on your heart to support the ministry, keep us going full time, consider supporting us through Patreon. There is a lot of Patreon exclusive material on there for our faithful patrons. And you can also support us just by picking up our books, our SFT gear, and also you can support us through the website. So anyways, the week starts off with that debate. Then we got another King James only debate, and I am really enjoying these. I've got a playlist right now, King James only debate playlist. So we've had many. They're all in there for people who want to have their own debate marathon on this topic. So this one next week as well is the King James Bible, the only infallible source and norm for theology. Mark Gageton, Will Kinney. I'm excited for this one. I think this one's going to be really, really good. Just like all the debates we've been having lately. Then we got Matt Slick. So this is all next week. Another debate marathon, like I said. So Matt Slick, Stanley Terry, was Jesus fully God and fully man during his earthly ministry? There's a lot of hype for this one. This one I'm pumped for. Now, I am probably in September, I'm hoping. We're going to have a similar to what we did with the Kent Hovind last month. We had an eschatology open mic. Kent Hovind gave a presentation, and then we had an open mic, pre-trib, preterism, post-trib, so on and so forth. We had like a open mic debate. And I'm working to do the same thing on the Trinity. So I'll have Matt Slick here, probably give a presentation or something for the first 15, 20 minutes on the Trinity, and then open it up, have a good discussion, have some good back and forth. So we're hoping to do that for September. And the other debate next week is, here we go, the Great James 2 debate. So David Preston and Charles Jennings a month ago, they debated Old Testament salvation. And now they're debating James 2, the Great James 2 debate. I really like taking these verses, these technical, controversial verses, and just digging deep. I mean, we just had the 2 Peter 2:20 debate last night. That one was 3.5 hours. Let me say that again. 3.5 hours on one passage. That's how deep the Bible is. And some of these passages deserve 3.5 hours worth of debate. So what is the proper exegesis of 2 Peter 2:20? If you have not yet seen that, please do check it out. That's the debate we had last night. And we're doing the same thing, James 2. So this one's coming up this week as well, next Saturday. So 7 days from now. All right, let me look at the chat real quick. I think everything is good. Those interested in debates, I'm open to recommendations. People send in requests, and typically what they do is introduce themselves, and then just give me a list of maybe 3 to 5 topics that you would feel comfortable debating. And I add you to the list, and then it helps me be able to organize debates, because I'll have a list, and I'll note down all the different requests and what people want to debate, and then I put people together hopefully for some of these awesome debates. And of course, October, this one's going to be huge. The Marian Dogmas debate, Protestant versus Catholic, Steve Christie versus Dr. Robert Sungenis. And of course, I'm excited for that one. So I think that's pretty much it. If you're not yet subscribed, please do make sure to hit that subscribe button. Share around this content, because the truth is important, and critical thinking is so incredibly important, which is why we host so many debates on so many different topics, because it's important, to engage these positions. And I personally like to debate too, because it's how we challenge ourselves. Some have said, you might feel confident with your position until you're cross-examined on it. So that's what we want to do, is we want to uphold critical thinking, and do so by hosting so many awesome debates. Anyways, that being said, Standing for Truth is going to wrap it up here. Good night as well. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you back here on Monday. God bless all.